The room was a romantic setting, scented candles, wine in glasses. On the table, shrimps and cream sauce, baked salmon and light salad, and for dessert, delicate meringue. The young, pretty mistress of the house was spinning in front of the mirror all evening. She was in anticipation of a special evening. After all, today is such an important date, exactly 5 years since she and her husband got married. The woman specially bought a beautiful fitted dress in advance, emphasizing all her charms, made a hairstyle, and was looking forward to the arrival of her husband from a business trip. They'd called yesterday, and Stephen promised that he would be on time and would not miss such an important date. Jennifer prepared a nice present for her husband. She bought a new fashionable shirt. She wanted to please her beloved spouse. However, she was alarmed by the fact that Stephen was already an hour late. She couldn't stand it any longer, so she decided to call him. The wind was howling, the frost was getting fiercer, and she couldn't see anything around her. Jennifer switched on the video link, but her husband disappointed her. "Honey, I'm sorry, I can't make it. We've had some bad weather today, and all the flights have been canceled. But I'll try to get out as soon as I can. I'll have time for one more meeting, so don't wait up for me. Go to bed." My wife was almost crying. "How could it be, darling? You promised. I was so prepared. I thought we'd have a special romantic evening together. Just you and me. I wish you'd called me back sooner to tell me you weren't coming." And then a female figure flashed in the background of the hotel room. There was no mistaking her long brown hair and supple frame. Jennifer almost screamed. "Stephen, who's that girl in your room? I don't get it." But the connection was immediately cut off, and no matter how many times Jennifer called back, the subscriber was unavailable. The woman tried to reassure herself. Maybe it was the maid after all. Stephen couldn't have done this to me. But then why did he drop the call? Is he not on a business trip and is now having fun with his mistress? Jennifer immediately typed in the city her husband was supposed to be in on the internet and looked at the weather forecast. She even felt sick to her stomach. It was clear and cloudless. Flights hadn't been canceled either. The woman drank a glass of wine in despair and cried. She quickly took off her dress, changed into pajamas, looked at herself in the mirror and cried again. The festive mood was gone. Gloomy thoughts swirled in her head. Jennifer replayed the last 6 months of married life in her head and now understood why Stephen was acting so strangely. His business trips had become twice as frequent, but he hardly ever brought any money back. All he knew was to complain that he was having problems at work, that the company was not getting back on its feet. The husband's business was really going badly. A year ago, Stephen bought a small shop for the production of spare parts for cars. But after the sanctions, foreign suppliers of component materials refused to cooperate. In the domestic market, Stephen could not establish normal cooperation. Jennifer herself was an accountant by profession, tried to help her husband, looked at the reports, and realized that if things continued like this, the company would go bankrupt. Stephen became increasingly gloomy, became absent-minded, and intimacy almost came to naught. Jennifer never reproached her husband, on the contrary, tried to cheer him up. She thought his behavior was due to problems at work. But more and more often, when she washed his clothes after business trips, clearly heard the persistent smell of sweet female perfume. And there it was. Jennifer panicked. She loved Stephen very much and didn't know what to do now. Having a family was very important to Jennifer. Her mom had brought her up that way from childhood. She taught her daughter how to be a good wife and mistress, how important it was to keep and protect the home. Dad died early. He was ill for a long time. Jennifer was 13 at the time. This grief shook everyone. But as hard as it was for Mom, she never got back together with anyone. There was just no room in her soul for another man. She literally burned with longing and left after her father. When Jennifer was already in college, she was completely orphaned. The girl grew up, became an adult, learned to survive on her own. After graduation, she went to work in her specialty as an accountant at the enterprise. It was then that she met Stephen. He was older than her by 10 years, seemed so reliable, sedate, and his intentions were the most serious. Colleagues advised Jennifer to hold on to such a man. They say, "With him will be good." The girl sincerely fell in love with Stephen. He was her first man and the closest person. Jennifer's flat decided to sell, and bought a large, spacious house, formed for two there and began to equip their home. Stephen, the first years and really tried, was an exemplary family man. There were no violent passions between them, more like a quiet, calm love. Jennifer went over all the episodes of their life together and could not understand what she did wrong. What had she done wrong? Why did Stephen decide to have a mistress? What was he missing? And she couldn't find an answer. The woman looked sadly out of the snow-covered window and suddenly noticed that a man was walking along the path. Wobbling, he was covered in snow and looked like a huge snowdrift. And then he took a dump right outside the wicket gate of her house. Jennifer thought irritably, "Drunk, probably can't stand on his feet, can he? Let him lie there. What do I care?" Jennifer cleared the table and was about to go to bed, but the thought of that man lying under the fence kept her awake. The woman thought, "And if he freezes to death, it would be my fault. I saw him and did nothing. He's probably someone's husband and son. And maybe he has a family waiting for him at home too. No, I can't. I'll go like this." Deciding to check on him, the woman threw on her fur coat and jumped out of the gate. The wind was blowing so hard that she was chilled to the bone in a minute. Jennifer began to shake the man. He was cold, dressed in some tattered clothes, burnt from the fire, and there was no smell of alcohol at all. Jennifer did not hesitate and dragged the uninvited guest into the yard on a sled, and then, putting him on her shoulder, carried him into the house. She undressed him and laid him on the sofa in the hallway. The man was thrashing about in a fever. Something had to be done. She put a thermometer on him. His temperature was under 40. The woman panicked and started calling the ambulance, but they told her directly that she had to get there herself, as the team would not be able to go out of town. All the roads were snowed in. Jennifer grumbled. "It's the same as always. It's been snowing all day and nobody cleared the roads. What if he dies? You got yourself a problem." The woman went through her medicine cabinet and found some antipyretic shots and a pack of antibiotics. She herself had recently had a bad bout of bronchitis. She gave the injection and began to change the towel with vinegar on the stranger's head. He shouted something in English several times. Jennifer grinned and muttered, "Well, what educated tramps we have nowadays, with knowledge of foreign languages." This stranger didn't look like a homeless man, though. His face is not soaked, and there is no unpleasant odor peculiar to people of this category. It's all very strange. Jennifer stayed at his bedside all night, even took time off work. You can't leave a stranger home alone in his condition. By morning, the crisis had passed. The fever had gone down a bit, and the patient finally began to come round. He was speaking English again, gesticulating, trying to explain something, to say something. Only Jennifer could barely understand a word. She had to open a translator on her phone. So they began to communicate little by little. With the help of correspondence, she realized that his name was James, and he had come from London for his own wedding. But he'd been duped, robbed, and tried to kill him. And he doesn't remember anything else. He woke up in a homeless shelter. No money, no ID. Wandered down the street and tried to find the embassy and the police station, but collapsed from feeling ill. Jennifer wondered. Wrote a text to him in Russian, and it was automatically translated by the program. James read, "Well, my name is Jennifer. You fell outside my house. You had a high fever. But don't worry, you're safe. As soon as you feel better, we'll go to the police together. In the meantime, rest." The man tried to say thank you in Russian and fell back into sleep. And then Stephen came home. He was furious to see a strange man on the sofa and started shouting from the doorstep. "I see I've come at a bit of a bad time. The lovebirds are still in bed. Well, sorry guys, a little interfered with your privacy. So this is how you waited for me. You missed me. I'm divorcing you. You've turned our house into a back alley." Jennifer looked dumbfounded at her spouse and excused herself. "What are you talking about? What's a passageway? I was just sheltering a sick man. He fell in front of our house. What was I supposed to leave him? Freeze to death? Look at him. He's a foreigner. Hardly speaks a word of our language. I'm just like you. I've never seen him before." "Stephen, calm down, calm down. It's an awkward situation, but it's not what you think it is." The noise woke James up and he jumped up, staggering with weakness, and tried to explain something to Stephen, but he shoved him roughly back onto the sofa and shouted again. "What are you lying to me? If you don't know him, why did you drag him into the house? We should have called an ambulance and the police and let them deal with him. I'm not going to live with you after this." "I see." The spouse couldn't stand it and got angry too. "Don't judge by yourself. I also saw that there was a girl in your hotel room, and the weather in your city was great, and the flights were not canceled. So tell me, what kept you from coming to our anniversary? Or are you just trying to make a big deal out of it?" Stephen was fidgeting. There was nothing to say, so he confessed. "But since you know everything, it's even better. Yes, I'm in love with another woman, and I'm leaving her. So we're even. But you won't be bored, will you? There, having fun with your tramp. Have a nice day." Stephen left like that with his suitcase, slamming the door loudly. Jennifer sat down in a chair and wept bitterly. She couldn't believe that right now, right this second, her marriage was crumbling, that now she would be all alone. James grabbed the phone and started dialing. "I failed you. Did I cause you and your spouse to fight?" "I'm sorry, sweet Jennifer, I'm sorry. I'll leave right now." The woman replied, "You had nothing to do with it. My husband cheated on me a long time ago. He admitted it himself. And he made this scene on purpose to make me feel guilty about the divorce. Until you get better, I'm not letting you go anywhere. You need some food. I'm going to heat up some soup and feed you." Jennifer spoon-fed James like a baby, as he was still very weak. Then she gave him tea with lemon and honey, and he looked at her with such gratitude. His eyes were so honest, sad, and a little naive, like a child's. The woman sighed, not knowing yet what to do or how to help the uninvited guest. She decided to call her best friend who worked as a teacher of English language and literature. "Kate, hi, I got a situation here. Could you come over to my place? I've got a man staying with me, but he's very sick. He's a foreigner, he hardly speaks our language. And you can't get much out of the translator on your phone. It distorts the meaning of many words. I need your help. And my husband just left me. I feel so bad, Kate, I'm so confused." The friend immediately replied, "Are you serious? Are you out of your mind? Taking in a stranger? Yeah, maybe he's a thief waiting for the perfect moment to steal from you. How can you be so careless? I can't believe Stephen. I mean, he's been a good family man. What the hell is going on in there? I'm leaving right now and you call the police right now." Jennifer replied irritably, "Don't bother with the police. We need to talk to him properly first to understand what happened." Within half an hour, Kate was talking animatedly to James in English, shaking her head and getting more and more serious. Then she translated everything to Jennifer. "And you're right, mate. It's not just a tramp. Or rather, not a tramp at all. It's James Klein. He's a businessman, lives in London, and he even gave his address. He says he's got a sibling, Billy, but they don't get on very well. Brother can't find his calling in life. Mostly plays on the stock market, has fun. James recently inherited his company from his dead father. At the same time, Billy was left nothing. His father did so because he was very afraid that the younger son will squander everything to the last cent. And Billy was very angry, completely stopped communicating. And recently James met a girl from our country, Bridget, through a dating site. She impressed him with her intelligence and beauty. He admired her photos. They corresponded for a long time and decided to get married. James was on his way to his own wedding. He dreamed he'd meet the bride's parents and ask her to marry him. He bought a beautiful ring. There was plenty of money on the card. Bridget met him at the airport as agreed. They kissed hotly and drove to her house. Only there was no one there. The girl assured him it was a surprise. The table was bursting with treats. James had a couple of sips of wine and that was it. The rest is a blur. He doesn't remember anything else. His cards, ring, money, documents, and of course no trace of his fiancée. It seems pretty obvious to me. It was a gang that got a naive foreigner drunk to make a profit. We must go to the police immediately and then to the embassy. It's a crime. Jennifer shook her head. Where is he going to go? He can barely get out of bed. It's such a bad cold. Let him lie down for a while, and then we'll take him out. And I feel sorry for the poor guy. He's in such a bad way. Since I took him in, I won't abandon him. I'll help him with everything. But I don't have much money myself. But nothing will think of something." Stephen rejoiced. Everything had worked out just fine. He realized, of course, that this tramp was not a lover at all, but now he had no conscience about how to part with his bored wife. He'd fallen out of love with Jennifer long ago. She was just convenient and the house order, not scandalous and cooks delicious. And when at a company corporate meeting Helen, he lost his head. It was a woman horror. She gave him such a bright emotions, fueled feelings, caprices, and was for him like a breath of fresh air. But only Helen did not want to put up with the role of mistress and demanded from Stephen divorce. And he kept dragging, looked at home at his wife and pitied her. Could not decide to break up. But today, everything worked out just fine. The man bought a bouquet, fancy champagne, and resolutely called Helen's flat. She came out and was surprised, but not at all pleased. "Well, hello. Thank you for the flowers, of course. They're lovely, and the champagne will come in handy. But why are you carrying suitcases? I don't get it." Stephen said triumphantly, "I've left my wife. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow, so take it. We're going to live at your place now. That's what you wanted. Can you imagine a naughty girl dragged some bum off the street? They're nursing him back to health, so I played on it. We had a big fight. Aren't you happy? I thought you dreamed of it." Helen remarked wryly, "You're a fool. You left your wife a whole house and will be living in rented flats. It's a wonderful prospect. What's there to be happy about? You bought the house together, so you own half of it. So kick that chicken out, pay her a settlement, and we'll live with you. And Jennifer's going to buy herself a little room. She's had enough. She's not much." The man was taken aback for a moment. "Helen, but I can't do that. We're civilized people. How am I going to get her out on the street? Where would she go? Besides, we've lived together for so many years. She hasn't done anything bad to me, so it's not human. We'll live in a rented flat, and then we'll take out a mortgage. We'll get our business up and running, and we'll have everything. Just be patient. The main thing is that we love each other, don't we?" "No, I don't agree to that. No way. I'm a young, beautiful woman. Why should I put up with this? You want to live with me, then do as I say. All I need is to pay the mortgage until I retire. Why should I be so happy? Remember, honey, I'm not Jennifer, and I know my worth. Or I'll leave you. I'll find a rich daddy, and you'll bite your elbows." Sweet Stephen did not allow the thought of parting with his mistress. He was crazy about her, and he replied peacefully, "What a bitch you are. And when you're angry, even more beautiful. All right, have it your way. Tomorrow we'll go to my place together and kick Jennifer and that bum out with her. And you happy now? Kiss me at last?" Helen began to kiss her lover eagerly. They made up and spent a passionate night together. Stephen no longer cared about the fate of his wife. He could not lose Helen and was ready to do any meanness for her sake. Jennifer was simply dumbfounded when Stephen burst into the house with his mistress under his arm and began to throw her out. "Here's the deal. We're going to split the house equally in court, so you'd better move out right now. And after the trial, I'll pay you a settlement. Buy yourself a room and take your bum with you. You're running a brothel here. Well, get a move on. Helen and I were planning on living here too. And I've invested a lot in the renovation, bought all the furniture. So you see, I have more right to this house than you do." The woman was amazed at the impudent cynicism of her spouse. And the girl looked at her with such disdain and behaved in a masterly way, looked into the rooms, opened cupboards. Jennifer cried, "How can you do this? By what right do you persecute me? Where am I going in this cold? Come to your senses. Your mistress has completely screwed up your brain." "You've lost your conscience," and Jennifer thought. James didn't understand what was going on. Jennifer wrote into the translator, "My husband is kicking us out. He says we will divide the house through the court. I'm desperate. I have nowhere to go, but he's very aggressive. I'm scared." James then started tugging on Stephen's sleeve and wrote the following to him. "I am the son of a banker, and I have a large account in my home country's bank. If you won't touch your spouse and leave, I will make an investment in your business and buy your house outright. All right? Just need a little time to sort out a few loose ends." Stephen reread it 3 times and, not believing it, laughed out loud. Listen, your lover must be out of his mind, isn't he? He writes to me that he is a millionaire and will return to his phantom England. That's hilarious. Do you take me for a fool?" But his wife confirmed James's words. "You shouldn't laugh. He is not my lover, of course, and you know it. But James is indeed a rich man. Kate, a friend of mine, had a long talk with him, and she says he is. He's just in trouble. What's it to you?" A new plan was immediately born in Stephen's mind. He had already imagined the simpleton listing a huge sum for the house, and the business could be picked up without difficulty. But how could he check that he wasn't lying? The man began to write to the foreigner. "For me to believe you, do one transaction and I'll see what kind of businessman you are. I just need a translator. Do you agree?" They struck hands. Stephen said firmly to Helen, "Let's go. Let's keep things as they are for now. I'll decide later what to do with this house." The mistress was furious and nagged Stephen all the way. "What's the matter? Why did you back down and take pity on your wife? Or did that bum talk you into it? What were you texting him about? I really like your house and I don't want to live in a rented flat." Stephen suddenly yelled at his mistress for the first time. "Calm down and shut your mouth. Don't shout so loud. I know what I'm doing. Be patient for a while. We'll soon be very rich. You'll see, this tramp isn't so simple at all. He will help us a great deal." Helen took offense. She wanted a rich and beautiful life here and now. It was not in her nature to wait and was not in her wait. And the girl did not like it at all that Stephen was now living with her. The man demanded breakfast. He had shirts to iron. And at night, Stephen snored. It was one thing to have romantic encounters, easy, pleasant ones. It was quite another to share a household. James finally recovered, and Jennifer and Kate took him to the police, and then to the embassy. It turned out to be very serious. James was given a huge fine for losing his visa and passport. The police opened a case, but after hearing his story, they were skeptical. However, they promised to check everything and warned him that restoring all the documents was not a quick job. Jennifer persuaded the man not to contact Stephen and not to conduct any transactions. She realized that his unscrupulous husband would simply deceive him. But the trusting businessman did not believe and still took up the cause, and really helped Jennifer's husband to conclude a lucrative contract. He expected that he would pay him for it, but Stephen did not think to do so. He rejoiced, realizing that the foreigner did not lie, but on the contrary, pressured him, threatened to kick Jennifer out. James was desperate. He tried to call home many times, but his brother did not pick up the phone. So he texted a friend who worked at his company via social media. From her, he learned the terrible truth, and it turns out that Billy told everyone that James had gone abroad and died there, and that he had misappropriated the company. But he's not a very good manager. His brother was just spending money and living on his own. Kate tutored James, gave him Russian lessons, and soon he was able to communicate a little with Jennifer. James was desperate. He urgently needed money to restore his documents. He had to go home and save the business his late father spent years building. Jennifer couldn't help with the money either, barely making ends meet on her meager salary. That's when she remembered her grandmother's gold bracelet. She cherished it so much. It was a memory of a loved one. Her grandmother had given it to her for her wedding. It had been passed down the female line in their family for generations. The woman never wore it, only admired it. Sometimes she dreamed of passing it on to her child, but now Jennifer made up her mind, showed the jewel to James and wrote, "I'll help you. I'll take it to the pawn shop tomorrow. It's antique gold. They'll give you a lot for it. I reckon you'll have enough to get a new identity. And a ticket home, too. After all, what's the use of fussing over it?" Tears came to the businessman's eyes. He threw his arms around Jennifer and didn't know what words to use to thank this wonderful woman. Kate, on the other hand, scolded her friend. "Jennifer, what are you doing? You and your husband are going through a divorce. He's kicking you out on the street, and you want to give your last cent to help a stranger to you. He'll go home and never think of you again. And you won't be able to buy the bracelet back. You'll never see him again. Come on, why are you making things so difficult for yourself? You've already done James a lot of good by sheltering him, feeding him. Let him work out his own difficulties." Jennifer realized this, but she answered stubbornly, sighing, "I can't do otherwise. Look at his eyes, Nina. They're full of despair. James is at an impasse. But who's going to help him if not me? Tell me. He doesn't know anyone here. So be it. It's stupid, reckless. I want him to remember me fondly afterwards. He's come to see his fiancée. He'll think our country is full of bandits and crooks. I won't be lost. I've got a job, a roof over my head, and we'll sort out the rest somehow. Jennifer pawned the jewelry and helped James make the paperwork and buy a ticket. Decided to have a farewell dinner. The man admired the hostess and spoke words of love in broken Russian. At the airport, they could not tear themselves away from each other for a long time. Jennifer choked with tears. She had grown so attached to James during this time. It was surprisingly easy to be with, despite the language barrier. He twisted his words so funny, looked at her in a special way, with genuine tenderness and warmth, and whispered goodbye. I will never forget you, my sweet favorite Jennifer. You are the best woman I have ever met on earth. Half of my heart will forever be here with you. I'm going to miss you so much. I'll make up my mind soon. Trust me, I will come back for you. The girl nodded, cried, kissed his cheeks, but in her heart she realized that she was saying goodbye to him forever. Her half of her heart also flew away with James. Stephen, having learnt that James had flown back to his homeland and had never given him any money from the business, still kicked Jennifer out of his own house and brought Helen in. He hoped that now he could start a new life, but it didn't. Helen was a disgusting hostess and lazy. A big house required a woman's care. Stephen was used to Jennifer getting up at the crack of dawn and preparing a hearty breakfast. Suits and shirts were always clean and ironed. Everywhere was tidy. At the same time, his wife never complained that it was difficult for her. On the contrary, in the evenings, just like him, when she came home from work, she would go to the cooker without talking. She listened to him patiently, tried to support him. He did not appreciate all this at all and thought that this is how it should be in a family. But now his life was a nightmare. Helen slept until lunchtime and then went on holiday with friends or to the fitness pool. Domestic chores didn't bother her at all. When an angry and hungry Stephen started slamming the door of the empty fridge and shouting, Helen just shrugged. Something you're not happy about, sweetheart. I hate standing at the cooker. What's the point when you can order dinner at a restaurant or hire a cook? I didn't hire me to be your housekeeper either. I had no idea you were such a grumpy bore. Now I wonder how your wife put up with you all these years. Relationships are supposed to be joyful, easy. And you're trying to bog me down in the family routine and make me a servant. Oh no, I'm not. I already ordered us pizza. Open the wine, have a drink, and relax. Stephen staggered back. But Helen, a honeymoon can't last forever. Don't you realize? I thought you were going to have a baby with me, to be my wife. We're so good together. You breathed new life into me. So why are you acting like a teenager? The girl pouted her lips, capriciously replied. And I may want to remain a little girl for you to spoil me. Like you used to give me presents and carry me in your arms. But you don't love me at all. You make me do the dishes. Why don't you put me to work? And it's too early for me to have kids. Let's just love each other and don't yell at me like that anymore. The man sighed. It was useless to argue with an infantile, capricious mistress. He wandered off to fry eggs and wash the dishes. And with bitterness and longing, he remembered how cozy and good it had been at home when Jennifer had been there. How divine her cooking had been. Stephen began to think of his wife often at home. Was I wrong to divorce her? Am I going to have to do all the housework myself? And how much money does Helen take in? It just keeps getting smaller and smaller. Things are getting worse. Soon there won't even be enough to pay the staff. The magic of their secret, passionate meetings with Helen had dissipated, and now both realized that they were dragging themselves down and were not ready to live together. Jennifer, too, was going through a difficult time. They could only rent a room on the outskirts of the city. Now it took more than an hour to get to work with 2 transfers. And the neighbor was a drunken drunk, always raging and shouting until midnight. But most importantly, she was desperately longing, not for her husband, but for her uninvited guest, James. She hadn't expected that of herself. She closed her eyes, and then his open smile and his sad, inquisitive eyes, his pleasant, soft voice. His funny phrases came back to her. She kept wondering how he had got there, whether he would be able to solve his family affairs. She wondered if he remembered her even once in a while. Kate tried to cheer her friend up somehow. She called often. "Jennifer, let's go to the cinema this weekend, or go for a walk in the mall. What are you like, a recluse? Homework, work, home, and that's it. Why are you giving up on yourself?" "Well, I divorced my husband. It's not a big deal." "Or do you still miss your foreigner? You could just put him out of your mind. He's back in his own country and living like he used to. You see, this trip to our country was just an adventure for him, and not a very good one at that. He's probably forgotten all about you. But don't be sad, let's go out." These words made Jennifer feel even worse, and she sniffled. "Don't hurt my feelings. You're right. James never called, even though I left my phone number." "Of course, who am I? And who is he?" "You're right, Kate. I need to get over him. And I can't. And I don't want to go anywhere. I'm sorry. I'm not in the mood. I'm just depressed. I don't want to do anything. You can't trust men. Whoever told me we weren't a perfect couple, but our beloved Stephen will bring this girl into our house and chase my wife away. I wouldn't believe it. I wouldn't have dreamed it in my wildest dreams. And most importantly, his lawyers so skillfully describe everything in court, as if all these years I lived solely at the expense of my husband, although I worked equally with him, and now even with compensation pulls. So enwrought in this damn communal apartment with a violent neighbor, I'm so sick of everything." And she decided to help her friend cope with depression in her own way. On her day off, she decided to visit. "Come on, Jennifer, get up, get dressed, and follow me. I'm going to take you to a place that'll make your sadness seem like nothing. I promise you'll come back a different person." Jennifer, of course, let her friend in, reluctantly packing up and rambling on. "Oh, Kate, and what kind of place is this? Is it a cemetery or something? I'd like to be there as soon as possible. I'd rather die than live like this." But when the women entered the animal shelter, the girl's heart sank. There were cats and dogs in cages and enclosures. When they saw the visitors, all of them like little children, immediately rushed out, wagged their tails as if on command, whimpered pitifully, and looked hopefully into their eyes. Kate told her the fate of each pet. "I've been through a difficult divorce myself. You remember, 2 children alone pulled. It was so hard, words cannot express. So I understand your condition perfectly well. It was my youngest daughter who brought me here once and persuaded me to take that black kitten. She named it Terrible. And you know, somehow, in some unfathomable way, things got better in our family. Caring for an animal heals the soul. I've been coming here with my daughters ever since. The children just help here, take care of the dogs, walk them, play. And I buy food and fillings whenever I can and bring them back. And I advise you to choose a friend. You will feel it in your heart, and everything will get better for you too. I really want that." Jennifer's friend wandered around confused, looking at the animals, choosing, and suddenly saw a small-sized red dog. Trudy lay sadly and indifferently near a bowl full of food and seemed not to notice anyone. Kate began to explain. "This is Dick. He's in great distress. His beloved old mistress, to whom he was infinitely devoted, died recently, and our kin didn't want to keep the pet and just threw the poor thing out on the street. And he is completely domestic. He began to be abused by yard dogs, angry boys. That's the trouble. And the neighbors brought the poor dog to us, begging us to take him in. We, of course, take care of him. But the shelter is a temporary home, not a home. Dick is very homesick, whining, not eating well, even his nose is hot." Jennifer asked, confused. "Can I try to pet him, please? I'd really like to." The shelter worker immediately opened the cage. The woman cautiously approached the dog and squatted down next to him. And for a long time, as if she were talking to a person, she spoke quietly to him. "My little one, my good one. How can I understand you? You loved your mummy owner very much, and now she is not around. And you, like me, have been thrown out on the street. Do you want to live together? I'll love you. We'll go for walks in the park. I'll buy you toys. I really need a faithful friend, you know." And the dog, as if he heard, got up and came to Jennifer. He nuzzled his nose into her palm and then licked it. His tail wagged and his eyes filled with hope. The woman could no longer contain herself. She sobbed. It seemed that all her grief had burst through her soul and burst out into the open. and now it was coming out in tears. She carefully took the dog in her arms and held him tightly to her, felt the warmth of his trembling body, and realized that she would not give him to anyone. They walked home together. Dick was happy. He was bouncing like a ball, caressing, and Jennifer was radiant. Now she was not alone. She had someone to take care of, someone to run to from work. Kate was happy too, and her plan worked. Finally, her friend would stop sitting at home. She would go out, and then, you see, and life will improve. Since that day, Jennifer had no time for depression. Faithful Dick did not give her boredom. They had fun, played like little children, and slept together under the same blanket. It particularly struck her when a drunken neighbor tried to insult her. Dick immediately stood on his haunches, barked loudly, and rushed to his mistress' defense. He almost clung to the offender's leg and growled viciously. Jennifer laughed, and the neighbor jumped up. He did not expect that the girl had such a guard and stopped bothering her. The nasty neighbor called the landlady and hoped that Jennifer would be thrown out on the street. But he miscalculated. The elderly woman only affectionately patted the shaggy friend behind the ear and allowed, "Let him be. I do not have a palace here. There is nothing to spoil. I like animals myself, and I don't mind at all." Now Jennifer went for walks with Dick after work. He was so looking forward to it and met his mistress with a gleeful bark, caressed and licked her cheeks. During one of these walks, her phone rang. The girl picked up the receiver and could not believe her ears when she heard the long-awaited. "Good afternoon, my sweet Jennifer. It's me, James. I've arrived already at the airport. When will you meet me? You haven't forgotten your tramp." Jennifer squealed with joy and immediately went with Dick to the airport. James was waiting for her there with a suitcase and a bouquet of flowers. They hugged and cried for a long time, and Dick sniffed them. Dick understood that if the hostess is pleased with him, then it is necessary to be friendly. Already an hour later, the young people dined in her room. The girl said, "This is where I live now. Stephen threw me out, and he hasn't paid for my half of the house yet. It's a long way to work now. It's cramped, but it doesn't matter. But I've got my best mate now, my favorite Dick. Isn't he cute? You're good. James, you speak our language so well, you can understand me. God, I don't need to tell you all about me. How did you solve your problems with your brother? How did it?" And the man was eager to tell. "Yes, sweet Jennifer, I did. But it's a very sad story. Just imagine I fly in, and I can't get into my mansion. Turns out Billy's got his hands on it too. He thought I died here. He was pretty sure of it. And you know why? Because he's the one who set up that meeting with my fiancée. There really is no Bridget Black. There's a criminal organization. And that girl's name is Rachel Smith. They were in the business of conning naive simpletons like me. My brother got in touch with them and offered to make some money. And he made a special order for me over the internet. He wanted them to take my life, not just steal it. I don't know why they took pity on me. They didn't kill me right away. Maybe someone got in the way. But those three lied to Billy about me being dead. They even sent a picture of me in a ditch, unconscious, saying the order was fulfilled. I had the help of a detective to find out and get to the truth. It just doesn't make sense to me to this day. Billy's my own brother, and now he's in prison. And so are those criminals. I was able to save the company, thanks to my deputy. He moved all the assets into a hidden account so my brother couldn't spend the capital. And the employees didn't believe I was dead, so they didn't scatter, waited for my return, and kept working. Jennifer, I've come for you, my darling. I want to ask you to marry me and take you back to London with me. Tell me, do you love me? Will you marry me? I love you very much." And Jennifer said, I can't be without you, but only I can't go away. What about Dick? I won't give him back to the orphanage. I won't abandon him. I can't betray him. Do you understand?" James put his arm around his fiancée and smiled. "Sweet Jennifer, I'm glad you have such a big loving heart, but you're worrying for nothing. Dick will fly with us. We'll get his papers done too. It won't be a problem. I think the baby's gonna love it. It's a big house and a big yard. There's plenty of room to run around. I'm so happy you're okay with this. And how stupid I feel, trying to find love on some website." James continued, "But, I'm even grateful to those thugs. If I hadn't ended up here, I wouldn't have met you, and my life would still be empty and lonely. You'll never regret agreeing to this. I will be your most faithful and devoted husband. You will never want for anything. We'll travel a lot. I'll show you so many interesting things." Jennifer felt like it was all some kind of fairy tale. She embraced James tenderly, and a wave of passion and love swept over them both. The next evening, Jennifer came home from work and saw her grandmother's bracelet on the table. She exclaimed, "James, honey, you bought it back. I can't believe it. It's a family heirloom. I thought it had been sold long ago. I'm so glad I have it back." The man smiled and replied, "Thank you. This bracelet is very dear to me now, too. After all, it saved me. It is because of it that I was able to return home. You said that in your family it is passed from parent to child. So I dream that we will have many children, and you will give it to our daughter. How's that for a plan?" Jennifer wrapped her arms around James, snuggled up to him, and realized that she just could never be apart from him again. James wasn't going to hesitate. The couple soon had a lavish wedding at one of the city's famous restaurants, and of course Nina was a witness. The friends were having a lot of fun. James kept wondering about the local traditions and made a scandal when they tried to steal the bride. He became uncomfortable with the laughter. He refused to let Jennifer go from him because he had been looking for her for so long. And rumors reached Stephen that the foreign tramp had returned, married Jennifer, and that his business was booming. Being cheeky and unscrupulous, the man still hoped to make a profit, so he immediately appeared on the horizon. He found out through acquaintances where his ex-wife was now living. Stephen was actually almost bankrupt. He even had to put the firm up for auction. So the creditors were keeping up with him, but he tried to appease James by resorting to lies. "What about our deal? I'm willing to sell the house outright. Jennifer, you said you'd invest in my business. Or have you forgotten? It's a very lucrative offer. You'll get a good percentage of the proceeds. Everything is on the table on my end." James calmly replied, "Oh, come on, mate. I never forget my promises. I'm ready to buy your house, or rather half of it. The other belongs to Jennifer, because you still haven't given her the money. So my wife has every right to live there on her own, and you kicked her out. But the problem is we're leaving soon. So why is the place going to sit idle? Jennifer has decided to put a man in there and make it legal, and we'll draw up a contract, right? That's what we're going to do. I've already found a tenant. He's moving in tomorrow. I hope you two will be friends. I know about the business, too. You're bankrupt and you put your firm up for sale. Well, I bought it. So I own it now. Maybe if I'm kind enough, I'll take you on, but as a car mechanic. How's that for a bargain? Don't be in a hurry to refuse. Think it over. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go. I've got a lot to do. My wife and I are leaving soon. So think about it. Either I buy half a house from you, but then you move out, or you live with your neighbor. That's the way it is, mate." Stephen was furious. He certainly hadn't expected this from an MIA foreigner, shouting at the top of his voice. "You rascal! You! How could you? What other lodger? What does that mean? A stranger is going to live in my house. You ruined my life, you left me penniless. Where the hell did you come from?" But James just waved goodbye and walked away, pleased with himself. He had decided long ago that he would take revenge on this terrible man who had caused so much pain to the woman he loved, and make him endure everything Jennifer had gone through because of him. And when she found out about everything, she hid and laughed for a long time. "Well, you did good. That's the right thing to do. Who's the lodger?" James smiled. Like who, that obnoxious alcoholic neighbor. He was thrilled when I offered him half a house for just the utilities and all the amenities. And your ex is going to have a hard time seeing that drunk person in his house every day. And I don't want his business. I bought it on purpose to resell it, just to get back at Stephen. Every man has to take responsibility for his actions. Let's just consider it his punishment. Maybe this will teach him something. Jennifer was surprised to the core. No man had ever stood up for her like this before, or tried to solve all her problems. She had grown to respect and love James even more. Stephen, on the other hand, was having a hard time. Helen, having learnt that her lover was left penniless, immediately left him without regrets. She was already fed up with their life together and decided to find a more respectable man. And Jack moved into Stephen's house. He immediately had a feast in the kitchen and fell asleep in his chair, snoring loudly throughout the house. Stephen was furious. He'd been drinking too and realized that the creature would be here every day now. The man cursed his ex-wife and her husband. He was filled with anger and jealousy that they were doing so well, while he was going downhill and couldn't do anything about it. Jennifer watched the floating clouds with delight through the window of the plane's porthole. It was a little scary and exciting, but so interesting. She held James' hand and couldn't believe that he was taking her away to a happy new life. 5 years had passed. Jennifer had long since learnt the language and settled into the new country, but it was not easy for her. At first, the woman was discouraged by the overcast weather. The rain and fog seemed to never end here. Sunny days were so rare, and the people, the customs, everything was confusing. The English are very reserved. The way of life is very different. It was hard to get used to everything. Dick seemed to be the only one who was excited about the move. He ran free in the spacious yard, ate well, and was completely satisfied with life. But in time, Jennifer even liked this quiet, calm, and measured life. Foggy Albion opened to her from a completely different side. Now Jennifer loved to look at the old architecture, walk in green parks. It turned out that the British are not boring at all. Just long and carefully choose a circle of dialogue, and if they are friends with someone, then sincerely and faithfully. Their family already has a little boy growing up. Little Nick did not let anyone get bored. James adored his son and wife and was proud of his family. Sometimes he invited very close friends or business partners to dinner, and they were always amazed at how rich the table with home-cooked dishes. They also marveled at what a beautiful greenhouse they had. It was Jennifer's outlet. She adored flowers, cared for them, and rested her soul watching her favorite roses and irises bloom. Still, she often remembered her homeland, felt a little sad, and often thought how unpredictable life and fate were. If she had not taken in a strange vagrant, she would probably have lived with an unfaithful husband, until now, and would not have learnt what it is to be truly loved. Jennifer's birthday was approaching, and James, like a true Englishman, decided to ask in advance what his beloved wife wanted. He did not understand and did not like surprises. The woman surprised him very much when she answered sincerely, "Honey, I miss my best friend Nina very much. Of course we call sometimes, but I would like to see her so much, to talk to her, to gossip in a feminine way. How we grew up together, and she's been inviting us over for a long time." James even changed in his face. "Honey, your wish is law to me. There's just no way I can. I've got some important things to do right now, and our son is too young to travel. And besides, I don't have the best memories of your country. So we'll probably stay home. You go and have a rest, have some fun. I understand you call it nostalgia for your homeland. Don't worry, I'll do a great job at the housework. I promise I'll water your flowers and take Nick to the pool. And you rest up for all of us, but know that I'll miss you very much, and I'll be waiting for you to come home. I don't worry about money. Take my card and don't deny yourself anything." Jennifer glowed, hugged her spouse, and kissed him tenderly. "I have you wonderful the best. I love you very much. Thank you for being able to feel my soul." Soon the best friends were celebrating their arrival in Kate's kitchen. They were gushing to each other about everything. "Congratulations, girlfriend. I finally found my happily ever after too. It's not a foreign prince, of course, but a simple electrician. Yeah, what do you want?" The English teacher fell in love like a girl. And this despite the fact that I'm in my 40s and have 2 grown-up daughters. I once had an electrician from the firm come round to fix a socket. It just so happened that Norman had left his phone in my flat, so I called him back. And then my daughter Molly started having trouble at school, and Norman helped us. He stood up for her, he talked to her, and he scolded and scared the boys so much that they became friends with her. Anyway, I don't know. It just sort of happened all by itself. Me and Norman together. My girls just love him, and I'm really happy. He'll be home from work soon, and I'll introduce you." Jennifer was happy for her friend. She talked about herself for a long time, and then suddenly asked, "And how is Stephen's life? I hope he's happy with his doll. I remember when James and I left, things weren't going well for him." Kate splashed her hands. So you don't know anything. After you left, Stephen was left with no money at all. He'd been hobbling around for a long time, looking for work. That girl left him, and then, as if to spite him, she married a famous banker. It was all over the papers. So Stephen couldn't take it anymore. He lost you and his mistress left him. He was left with nothing. And then he started drinking with the lodger you gave him in the end. I don't know what happened, but your house burned down. And Stephen disappeared somewhere. So he's either gone or he's dead. I don't know. I haven't seen him in a while, so he's been punished for everything. He fell for that bimbo. And he was so mean to you. Took a lot of nerve with the courts and the scandals, so he got what he deserved. Jennifer shook her head. She even felt sorry for Stephen. He'd never been able to build a family, to live a decent life. So he broke down and drank himself to death. The friends spent a whole week together, walking around their hometown, chatting. Jennifer began to catch herself thinking that she wanted to go back to England to her son and husband, that it's her home there now. The woman couldn't stand it any longer and dialed James. He immediately picked up the phone. Hello, my good one. How was your holiday? Nicholas, Dick and I missed you terribly. I love you, sweetheart. Did you remember when to meet you? Jennifer heard her son's voice in the receiver. He called out in a ringing voice. Mummy, when are you coming? I missed you so much. Daddy and I are preparing a surprise for you. But it's a secret. The woman immediately replied. I love you, my good ones. I'm flying out tomorrow. I'll bring you a bunch of gifts and souvenirs, and I miss you very much too. Before leaving, Jennifer visited her parents at the cemetery. Long and carefully cleaned the overgrown graves, cried, gently stroked the portrait of Mummy, and whispered, How early you left, my dear, beloved Mum and Dad. You should know what kind of grandchild you have growing up. He misses his grandparents so much. Be happy for me, please. I'm so happy forever. You will be in my heart no matter what happens. There was a real surprise waiting for Jennifer at home too. James and his son did their best. They baked a cake and set the table. They met Mum at the airport with flowers. Everyone cried, hugged, and was very happy that again the whole family was gathered. But most importantly, James's mum was sitting at the table. She had been cold to Jennifer all these years. She didn't like the fact that her son had brought his wife from another country. She barely spoke to her grandson. But today was a special day. Mother-in-law hugged Jennifer for the first time. The woman congratulated her on her birthday and said that she was proud of her daughter-in-law, that she had seen how her son had not found a place for himself all week. She realized how much he loved Jennifer, so she decided to be the first to reconcile. Little Nick kept hanging around his grandmother and was also happy that the adults had reconciled. They had a nice, heartfelt sit-down. My mother-in-law shared stories, memories of her life, showed her family album, praised the treats. At the end of the evening, she decided to take her grandson to stay with her. The little boy happily agreed, as Grandma promised they would go to the play center tomorrow. James gently hugged Jennifer and whispered, Sweetheart, give me a daughter. I'm really dreaming of it. I'm sure she'll be as beautiful as you and as smart as me. I love you so much I can't put this feeling into words. Jennifer melted, kissed her spouse, and felt incredibly happy. She now knew what it meant to find a soulmate. James was her soulmate. They felt so much for each other, understood each other half-heartedly. It's such a rare feeling. It was the best birthday ever, and Jennifer remembered it warmly for a long time afterwards. Emma was rushing home when suddenly she heard Emma turned off the bedroom light. Time to go to bed. Tomorrow's a day off, of course. She could stay in bed longer, but it was almost 1 o'clock in the morning and her eyes were getting sleepy. Hurry up and get under the covers. The woman watched her favorite TV series and could not tear herself away. So their everything was vital love, betrayal, and a difficult period of the main character. Just like in her, Emma's fate. The series also ended with a happy ending. It was clear from the very beginning. There's no such thing as a happy ending in a movie like this. Anything could have happened to Emma. But the circumstances are such that she's doing well now. I can't believe it sometimes. How great everything turned out in the end, as if Emma's life was prescribed by the director who creates all these series. It all started many years ago, and at the start little Emma had a lot of hardships and losses waiting for her. Her early childhood she remembered vaguely. In the memory remained only sensations and images. Father strong, reliable, big. He often carried his daughter on his strong shoulders. The girl adored these moments. It was both fun and a little scary to look at the world from such a height. Her father's strong arms supported her back and legs. Emma knew she was safe. Mom. Warm hugs, kisses, a gentle voice, her face always somewhere high and lost in a haze. Emma can't remember Mom's features. They blur, slip away. But for some reason she can still clearly see her mother's dress in front of her turquoise with small black polka dots. And then her parents were gone. Suddenly, overnight, the lives of the young couple were taken away by a fire in the dormitory. Someone left an unlit cigarette butt on the sofa. But fortunately, Emma was then in a round-the-clock kindergarten, and therefore did not suffer. She remembers how much she longed for her family. First she cried, then she was angry at her mom and dad. Why don't they come? Why don't they pick her up like they used to? The nanny explained as best she could to the 3-year-old. Emma was very tiny then, but she still remembered her feelings: fear, despair, for some reason rage. The girl was to be sent to an orphanage. The appropriate papers were already being drawn up for her. But then Aunt Chris, her father's sister, showed up. She lived alone in the village, pulling 2 daughters and Emma. In general, she was not particularly needed, especially since brother and sister hardly ever spoke to each other. But relatives of Emma's father pressed on Chris, say, cannot be allowed to have a living aunt girl in the orphanage grew up. So she had to take her niece in. Chris was the kind of woman for whom it is very important what people say. Emma's childhood was not a happy one. Aunt Chris wasn't exactly happy about the extra mouth. No, she fulfilled her duty to the child: correctly dressed, fed, educated. She sent her child to school on time, made sure Emma didn't hang around, and taught her niece the ins and outs of everyday life. But Emma saw how her aunt treated her daughters, with what love and tenderness she looked at them, how she smiled at them. Aunt Chris always tried to please her girls, bought them on the last money sweets, which they loved, dressed them in clean dressy dresses. Emma, like the youngest, had inherited clothes, and her wishes were never taken into account. Aunt Chris was delighted when her girls fidgeted in front of the mirror. What beauties are growing up. They're just photo models and can pose. Emma did the same, trying to win her aunt's praise. But the words were quite different to her: that monkey is wriggling all like her mother. You should do something else, and so it was with everything. No wonder that Emma grew up a quiet and even perhaps hindered girl. She tried to be as inconspicuous as possible, so as not to irritate her aunt and cousins. Emma cleaned the house constantly and often cooked dinner. She wanted to justify her life in this house in some way. Emma wanted to prove to Chris that she hadn't taken her niece in for nothing. She was useful too. Emma had realized from an early age that no one would love her just for her pretty eyes. Recognition and respect must be earned. The girl dreamed of growing up soon and becoming independent. Therefore, having finished 9 grades of the village school, she applied to the college. That 2 more years of school was out of the question. Emma needed to quickly get a profession and separate from the family of Aunt Chris. She had been told this more than once. And the older Emma got, the more often such conversations took place. You're not smart enough to finish the 11th grade and go to college, her aunt said about her niece's future. That's why you should go straight to college. You'll get a profession. In 3 years you will become independent, you will start earning money. Who knows? Maybe you'll settle down in town or get married. You're not so bad looking. Yeah, Emma grew up to be a very pretty girl. She knew that. She had eyes. And she looked in the mirror, sometimes big hazel eyes framed by thick black lashes, plump, well-defined lips, chiseled cheekbones. The figure was a success, too. Emma was tall, slender, long-legged. Aunt Chris often said that Emma was not their breed. Her own daughters had stronger bones, rounder cheeks, lighter hair. Maybe it was because of this different breed that her aunt didn't fully accept her niece. Emma didn't know for sure. She only realized that she looked very much like her mother, and that she grew up in an orphanage. So Emma didn't know her relatives. Maybe they'd be a lot nicer to a girl of their breed than Aunt Chris. Oh well. Emma was a very modest, quiet girl, did not go to dances, did not go out with boys in the evenings. Still, she had her admirers in the village. When Emma was about 16 years old, she began to be courted by local boys. But Emma was not ready for such relationships. And the girl did not plan to marry early. First, she wanted to get a profession, get on her feet, feel confident, and then she could think about her personal life. Emma dreamed of a big, strong family, a loving, caring husband, at least 3 children, a spacious, cozy house. She wanted love, understanding of people close to her. But the girl knew first she had to study to prepare the ground. So after school, Emma went to the city. She, as a visitor, was provided with a hostel. The girl was only 16 years old when she found herself all alone in an unfamiliar place. The abundance of people and cars, the new way of life, all this was confusing at first. But then Emma even liked it. She became almost independent from her aunt in her 16 years. She lived on her own, received a scholarship and payment for the loss of the breadwinner. This money was enough for food, clothes, and transportation. The girl did not need more. At the age of 20, Emma received a diploma. Now she was a food technologist, which she was very proud of. The name of the specialty sounded solid and weighty. However, very soon the girl realized that it was impossible to get a job in the city without experience. The scholarship was no longer paid, as well as payment for the loss of parents. For the state, she is now an adult, a young specialist. Accordingly, she had to support herself. Emma got a job as a cleaner in the Housing and Utilities Department. She grabbed the first vacancy she could find. How can you make sense of it when hunger and the street loom in front of you? The work was hard, physically exhausting. The pay was minimal, but at least she was given a room under the stairs as a housing and utilities employee. At least she had a roof over her head and some money for bread and milk. Thank them for that. Emma did not give up her attempts to find a more qualified and better paid job. In her free time, the girl went on interviews, proudly showing potential employers her red diploma. But no one needed a young lady with no experience. One day she was lucky after all. She came for an interview at a beverage company. Having seen the vacancy in the newspaper, Emma decided to try her luck. Already in the first minutes of the interview, the girl realized that she would not be hired. The HR employee seemed to communicate with Emma for the sake of a checkmark. Maybe she was fulfilling some recruitment plan or creating a semblance of work. Emma immediately guessed that she would not be hired here as a technologist. And then he walked into the office, Aiden, a tall man in jeans and a plain black t-shirt under which she could see strong muscles. You could tell he played some kind of sport or went to the gym. He had a feeling of strength and self-confidence. He looked like a Hollywood actor, a slightly mocking look, white teeth, a charming smile, charming dimples on his cheeks. The man was about 15 years older than Emma. The girl, without wanting to, looked at him. Then she realized, looked away. She didn't want him to notice her involuntary admiration. He'd think she was a fool. But Aiden had noticed. He winked cheerfully at Emma and turned to the human resources lady who was conducting the interview. And who is this young, lovely creature, an applicant for the position of technologist? But she's not a good fit. She has no experience at all, and her specialization is not the right one. Yes, it's hard to find a job for young people without experience. The man shook his head, looking at Emma with interest. It's hard on them. What about the secretary position? I'm in need of a new assistant right now. She's young, quick, energetic, and she's got the right looks, which is important for our image. We were going to transfer Smith from the energy department, the personnel officer reminded me. Smith looks good in her position. Let's put the girl on probation. Something tells me she'll do a good job. Aiden winked at Emma and left the office, grabbing a file from the desk. Without expecting it, Emma became a secretary. The job was not difficult. The girl was quickly brought up to speed. I'm sorry you're in such a difficult emotional situation, Emma. Falling in love with a married boss is a very delicate and painful situation. I want to support you and remind you that your feelings are natural and beyond reason. It's not your fault that you fell in love, but you correctly realize that a relationship with a married man is a path to a dead end that will only bring pain to all involved. You're thinking that Aiden is not for you. A family man has a rational grain. It is better to accept this situation for what it is and try to deal with your feelings. They'll fade with time. Focus on work, personal goals and interests. Find new hobbies and meet up with friends. Perhaps you should consider a new romantic encounter. It will be easier to distract yourself that way. Hang in there, Emma. You are a strong girl and you will definitely cope with this difficult situation. I believe in you. If you want to talk, I'm always ready to listen." Over the weekend, Emma got used to the idea that she had nothing in common with her boss. But on Monday, when she saw his smile and his eyes with a sly squint, she could not control herself again. She was dreaming, daydreaming. She wanted Aiden to hold her in his arms, to kiss her, to hold her close. Emma would be the happiest person in the world. One evening, Aiden invited Emma into his office. It was late. The co-workers had dispersed. The boss was preparing for an upcoming audit and had stayed late to look over the reports. Emma was required by regulation to stay as long as the boss was at work. Aiden rarely stayed late. Once every couple, or 3 months at most. That's when he did too. "Emma, I need to talk to you straight." The man began as Emma sat down in the visitor's chair. The girl tensed. Maybe the chief had some complaints about her work. What if he offered her to write a letter of resignation? Where else would she find such a job? "You've been with us for 6 months. You're a good girl, you're efficient. But I realized not so long ago that it's not just those qualities that attract me to you." Aiden looked Emma straight in the eye and spoke in a quiet, calm voice. All of this together made an incredible impression on her. "You're very beautiful," the boss continued. "But it's not even that, not only that. There is something about you that makes me think of you all the time. I don't know what it is." Emma was already a little dizzy from everything that was happening. Her heart was racing in her chest. There was a chill in her stomach, just like before exams. "I think you have some feelings for me too. Am I right?" Aiden stared at Emma, waiting for an answer. How could the girl deny the obvious? Yes, of course. She had been in love with the chief for a long time. She tried not to show her feelings. She thought she was succeeding well. But no, Aiden, it turns out, understood everything. Later, many years later, Emma looked at the situation with different eyes. Aiden had pressured her, made her feel like she had a choice, but in fact the outcome was a foregone conclusion. Aiden is rich, powerful, a handsome man, mature, established. And she is a young girl in a very dependent position on him. Aiden couldn't help but realize how important this job and this salary were to Emma. And he knew how to treat naive young women, well, how to behave in a way that would make them lose their heads to him. But the realization came much later. Then it seemed that fate had made her an incredible gift. The girl did not even believe that she was so lucky. A man like Aiden had caught her eye. She was in love with him and would do anything for him. "Yes, you're right. I have feelings for you too," Emma confessed, blushing. She didn't know why she suddenly felt fragile and vulnerable. "So you were not mistaken," the man smiled. "Let's make a deal first. Let's stop yelling at each other. Secondly, I really want to spend more time with you. So I suggest that we have dinner at a restaurant right now. How about it?" Emma shrugged. She hadn't yet gotten used to the idea that Aiden himself was proposing a relationship to her. It was unbelievable. At that moment, she had somehow completely forgotten about the chief's wife and his 3 sons. It didn't matter. The main thing was Aiden. He's there. He looks at her with eyes full of tenderness and admiration, smiles at her, and invites her to dinner. "I'm probably not dressed for a restaurant," Emma said finally. There was no dress code in the company. Everyone wore what they wanted to wear. Emma came to work that day in jeans and a t-shirt. If she had known, she would have worn one of her favorite dresses, which now, thanks to her good salary, she had plenty of. Emma. Aiden smiled. "You don't understand anything, and you don't even realize how gorgeous you look in those jeans of yours. It's just adorable." That evening they went to a restaurant. It was the first time Emma was in the cabin of the chief's expensive foreign car. It was also, by the way, her first time in a restaurant. The girl felt a little confused. At first she did not know how to behave, what to say. She was afraid of looking like a village idiot in front of Aiden. But gradually the man managed to do the seemingly impossible. With his jokes, mixed with compliments, he relieved the young companion of her stiffness. She didn't even notice how she began to communicate with him simply and sincerely. Aiden wanted to know everything about Emma, and she told him about her cold childhood, her difficult years of school, and her work as a janitor. Aidan looked at her earnestly and remained silent, not interrupting her, eagerly catching every word. "You've had a hard life," he said when Emma had finished. "Life has not been very good to you. But you're with me now, and things will be different." Emma smiled. She immediately and unconditionally trusted this powerful and influential man. At last the girl felt secure. An unfamiliar sensation, but very pleasant. Then they kissed for a long time in Aidan's car. Emma felt dizzy from his embrace and kisses. His touch felt good to her. She liked to feel the warmth of his body. She greedily inhaled his scent and was truly disappointed when Aidan, pulling away, suddenly said he had to go. He drove her home, kissed her softly on the cheek. "I can't leave you here alone," he said, glancing around the neighborhood. "We'll figure something out." Emma and Aidan's story had been going on ever since. They didn't hide their relationship at work, but they didn't advertise it. Although Aidan could smile at Emma in a special way in the presence of colleagues, and even complimented her in front of them. That is, not too flamboyant. Of course, it wasn't long before everyone knew everything. It made Emma a little uneasy. But no one said anything to her face. People valued their jobs and held on to them. That was probably why no one wanted to ruin their relationship with the chief. Before Emma knew it, Aidan had become everything to her. She didn't need anyone else, as long as he was near. To hear his voice, to inhale his scent, to feel his heartbeat. Emma was ready to dissolve in him, to do for him everything he wanted. When they did not see each other for a long time, which did not happen often, the girl was very longing. She could not eat anything. She melted before her eyes, and she ceased to be interested in anything. Books were not read, TV series were not watched. Emma counted the days and even hours until she met her lover. It was like an addiction. Aidan patronized Emma. He liked to surprise and delight her. The man was not stingy with gifts, expensive jewelry, brand-name clothes, shoes, certificates to spas. He thought of something new every time. Aidan rented a luxurious apartment for Emma in the city center, spacious, bright, stylishly furnished. Sometimes he stayed here overnight. And in those moments, Emma felt especially happy. She imagined they were husband and wife. She didn't have to share him with anyone or hide. The only thing that clouded her happiness was that Aidan had a family, a fact that couldn't be ignored. The man, without noticing it himself, often told Emma something about his children or his spouse. They were mostly funny and sweet stories. The man loved his boys and had great respect for his wife. Did he love her? Emma couldn't answer that question for herself, and Aidan didn't dare ask. No, they often talked about frank topics, but here Emma was afraid to hear a positive answer. What if Aidan really loved his wife? And she, Emma, just a passing fancy. And yet Emma felt that Aidan took her very seriously. He may have planned a brief affair with the young secretary at the beginning of their relationship, but then it turned out that they were very good together. "You understand me like no one else," Aidan confessed more than once, looking at Emma. "I feel so good with you and so calm, my soul rests. It's such an amazing feeling to realize that there is someone who accepts you with all your strengths and weaknesses." Aidan was right. Emma did love him with some kind of unconditional love. Even if he had committed some horrible act or crime, it wouldn't have changed Emma's attitude towards him. 10 years flew by unnoticed. Emma and Aidan grew closer during that time. They occasionally flew together on vacations. Aidan would book a business trip at work and take Emma with him. Those were wonderful days: the sea, the beaches, the incredible beauty of nature. And it was just the two of them, with no other eyes or ears. Emma wondered more than once if Aidan's wife knew that her husband had had a mistress for a long time. It was unlikely that she was still in the dark. The woman was not a naive fool. One day, Emma dared to ask Aidan about it. "Don't worry," he smiled, stroking Emma's hair. "She and I have a loose relationship. We, without straining each other with jealousy and control. Mealy is free to do whatever she wants, just like me." Emma couldn't understand that. She explained to herself that this relationship between the couple was a marriage of convenience, not love. Aidan and Mealy's parents were big businessmen who had decided to pool their capital and invest it in their children. There wasn't much love between the couple. Emma didn't want to think so. It was somehow comforting and gave hope that when Aidan's children grew up and became independent, he could finally divorce his wife to make her Emma his lawfully wedded wife. Yes, Emma was no longer the young, inexperienced 20-year-old secretary who had agreed to have an affair with the chief. She was in her 30s by then. Well, I guess that's just her nature. Emma remained naive, maybe even worldly stupid. It seemed to her that sooner or later Aiden would marry her. 2 more years passed, and then one morning Emma realized she couldn't get out of bed. She felt sick, nausea rising to her throat at the slightest movement. At that moment, the woman realized that a miracle had happened. It looked like she was expecting a baby. She and Aiden had been very careful. The man didn't want children outside of marriage, but no method of contraception gives a 100% guarantee. Despite not feeling well, Emma suddenly felt happy. She felt warm and clear at heart, and she got out of bed and made her way to the pharmacy where she bought a test. Emma was very afraid that she was wrong. But the test did not disappoint and almost immediately showed 2 bright stripes, indicating that she had a baby under her heart. Emma hadn't worried much before her conversation with Aiden. Yes, he'd said more than once that he didn't want any more children. But she didn't think that Aiden would reject her when he found out about the baby. He loved her so much, cared for her so tenderly, showered her with compliments and gifts. So wouldn't he be happy to hear that they were going to have a baby soon? Emma has been dreaming of a baby for so long. When she met moms walking with their babies, she looked at them and envied them, desperately envious of those women with strollers. And now she's going to have a baby too. Finally, a son or a daughter, it didn't matter. The important thing was that Emma would love him, and he'll love her too. Emma has a man she loves, and now she's going to have a baby. The dreams of her childhood and youth are coming true. It's such a blessing. Aiden, hearing the news, frowned. Emma, but we had a deal. There was a distinctly accusatory note in his voice. Emma started to justify herself, surprising herself. She had already realized that Aiden wasn't happy about the baby, but she still hadn't given up hope of changing her lover's mind. She wanted him to share her joy and excitement, to tell her that everything would be all right. It didn't work. The man stood his ground. He didn't want the baby. The only way out was to terminate the pregnancy. Children out of wedlock were out of the question. Emma cried, begged Aiden to come to his senses, and for the first time in their 12-year relationship, she was angry at the man she loved. How dare he suggest such a thing to her? To get rid of her long-awaited, wanted child. I love you. I like the way things are between us. But the baby doesn't. I have the right to decide, Aiden said. No, you don't. Emma slammed the door and jumped out of the apartment Aiden had rented for her. She ran off into the night wherever she could see. The woman wasn't afraid to stay on the street. She had her cell phone on her. Plus, she'd accumulated a small fortune over the years. She'd have enough money. Enough for her and her baby for a while. And then Emma would get a job and everything would be fine. I won't betray you, my little one, Emma said to her daughter. Yes, to her daughter. Emma realized what was waiting for the girl the very moment she ran away from home. Her intuition had worked, and the woman trusted her completely. Emma quit her job at Aiden's company and rented a small apartment on the outskirts of town. Rent was cheaper there, and she didn't have to save money now. Aiden called often. Emma answered right away. Each time she thought her lover had come to his senses. But no, he still stood his ground, wanting Emma back, but urging her to get rid of the baby. Emma was nervous. She was under tremendous stress every day. She was terrified of the future. The woman could not find a job. Most importantly, she had no one to lean on. Emma had grown accustomed to Aiden, to his sensitivity, attention, tenderness, and support. He could playfully solve all her problems and lift Emma's spirits with a few words. And now Aiden had become alien and inaccessible. Emma could feel their bond breaking, and it was almost physically painful. Sometimes she even thought about doing what he wanted, getting rid of the baby, and then everything would be as it had been. But those thoughts quickly faded away. No, Emma would have this baby, have it and raise it. She'd be fine. She'd wanted to be a mother for so long. She hadn't realized how strong that desire was until she had a baby in her heart. And yet Emma couldn't keep the pregnancy going. Worries, constant stress, nerves, all this together gave such an unfortunate result. Emma collapsed on the street. The pain was such that her eyes went black. Emma thought she was going to pass out. But no, She saw, realized, and felt everything. Someone called an ambulance. Emma was taken away from the store, on the porch of which she was writhing in pain. The woman was ready to endure any agony to save her baby. But something told her that nothing would work. Hope, of course, remained, but it was very weak and ghostly. In the hospital, on a cold couch, under the indifferent looks of doctors, strictly looking from under white masks, sounded terrible for Emma words clean. There's nothing left to save. Then Emma lay in the ward. There were several other women here. They were still pregnant. The doctors had saved their babies. The expectant mothers were talking in hushed tones so as not to alarm Emma, discussing their babies. Each of them was sure that now all the threats were over and their babies would be born. But Emma had nothing to hope for. At the first visit, the doctor shocked Emma with the news: most likely, you will not be able to become a mother. It's a complicated case. It was about saving your life. You should know that it is unlikely that you will be able to give birth naturally. But there are options. Medicine doesn't stand still. Emma wasn't listening. Next thing she knew, she was falling into an abyss of despair and fear. Would her biggest dream never come true? Would no one ever call her mom? What was there to live for? Aiden met Emma at the hospital. How did he know what had happened? The woman was surprised, of course, but not particularly surprised. She didn't care much about anything at that moment. Emma wanted to go to the apartment she'd rented for herself, but Aiden had taken her home, the place where she'd lived for years and where she'd been happy. "Stop fooling around," Aiden said. "Get back here." Well, that was a mess. Home was home. And Emma didn't care. It took a long time for the woman to come back to life. At first, she couldn't even eat, and that was only because Aiden made her. She didn't need anything but a couch and a pillow, and no one to touch her. Emma blamed herself for not keeping the baby safe, thinking too much about stupid things, worrying about nothing. That's the result. She'd thought it was Aiden's fault too at first, but he'd tried so hard. The man had turned back into the same sensitive and attentive man he had been at the beginning of the relationship. Cooked for Emma her favorite dishes, watched TV shows with her, cared as much as he could. It seemed very touching. "I think I genuinely regret what happened," Aiden said. "I reassessed the situation and realized that I had been selfish. I'm sorry. Let's start over. This time I'll be more attentive to your wants and needs. The doctors said you were between life and death. It's scary to think that I might have lost you." Gradually, Emma melted away. She accepted the current state of affairs. After all, children weren't the end of the world. Many people now consciously choose childlessness, and there are many interesting things besides heirs. In addition, next to her was such a person loving, sensitive. Not everyone is so lucky. And Emma decided to stay happy, no matter what. And it worked. Aiden and Emma began to travel more. Over the next 2 years, they traveled almost the whole world up mountains, on ocean waves, and even across the desert in jeeps. It was so exciting, thrilling, and wonderful. The main thing is that Aiden was always there, protecting, supporting, hugging. His children were grown now. They didn't need their father every day, and Mealy never needed one at all, especially in her husband's presence. So now Aiden could spend more time with Emma, which of course she was delighted about. But as time went on, things began to change. At first subtly, and then more and more clearly. Aiden was suddenly incredibly busy, staying late at work, going on business trips, and when he was with Emma, he was still in his own thoughts. Aiden didn't compliment Emma anymore, didn't ask her how her day was going, and he didn't talk about himself much either. Emma panicked. She was suddenly afraid. She'd gotten used to having Aiden around all the time. It seemed to her that it would always be that way. They had been through so much together. But now, something strange and frightening was happening. The man was clearly distant, and the process was gaining momentum and speed. Emma didn't even dare talk to Aiden about it. She was no longer the naive, inexperienced girl she'd been at the beginning of her relationship with him. But her insecurities hadn't gone away either. Outwardly, this Emma looked like a successful and satisfied woman. But that was only on the outside. Emma was afraid to hear direct, honest answers to her questions that would undo everything in her life. So she kept quiet. But Aiden himself once decided to have a serious conversation. That day, or rather evening, was forever etched in the woman's memory. Aiden arrived late at Emma's house, when she was about to go to bed. The woman was glad. She missed him very much. Emma missed talking to him, his jokes, and even his funny jabs. Maybe things weren't so bad between them, since Aiden had decided to come to her at a time like this. Maybe Emma was just screwing herself up beyond belief. Emma, Aiden said, "It's hard to accept this right away, but we have to break up." Emma felt as if she'd been hit with a gush of cold water. She flapped her eyelashes confusedly and must have gone pale overnight, because Aiden hurriedly pulled up a chair for her. Apparently he was afraid Emma would faint or something. Then the man talked at length about how he'd been happy with Emma for almost a decade and a half, describing her virtues and assuring her that she had more to come. It happens all the time. Relationships are just exhausted. There's no more of that spark, that passion, emotion, vivid sensations. "The same thing is happening to you," he said. What does he see? What makes Aiden think that Emma's feelings for him have faded too? Emma thought. It's probably just easier for him to think that, since he's going to leave her. And of course he didn't want to feel wrong about it. It's much easier to believe that Emma, too, has grown cold to him. And as he said, the relationship is over. Aiden talked a lot, and as always, quite persuasively. The man knew how to do that. Emma listened, nodding somewhere, answering something somewhere. She didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't argue, because she realized it was useless. Aiden had already made up his mind for the two of them. You could see it in his eyes. It was in his voice and in every gesture. He was talking, and I was slowly dying, Emma thought. I realized that the old Emma was gone. Aiden, he was everything to me. Without him, I had no idea how I would exist. Aiden admitted with shocking sincerity, "I met someone else, and I developed strong feelings for this other person. I myself did not expect that such a thing was possible in my old age." The man couldn't hold back a smile when talking about his new love. "This is something incredible, Emma. You're going to have to quit my company." "Quit? It's just that she'll be working there now." "Well, you can't have you two dating all the time. It would be hard on both of you. But also for me, of course." "I understand," Emma nodded, barely holding back tears. "I feel so lousy about the whole thing," she said. "I'm really sorry for you," Aiden grumbled. "It'll be okay with me," Emma smiled. She didn't want Aiden to feel sorry for her. "Not this. You're sorry about this, but I told you everything honestly. I didn't lie to you. It's hard, this whole thing. I'll help you find another job, and you can stay in the apartment as long as you want until you find a new one." Thanks, Emma nodded. That was it. Emma's old life was over. She wouldn't stay in the apartment that held so many happy memories. She'd move to another city because it reminded her of Aiden. And it wasn't easy. Wow, so strange they had been together for a whole 15 years, but almost 15. Emma was used to Aiden, used to living with him, and thought it would always be that way. Everything turned upside down in the blink of an eye. Emma used her savings to rent an apartment in the new city and started looking for a job. And here she had to face the harsh truth: finding a suitable place was not easy. Getting a job in her specialty was out of the question. For almost 15 years, Emma had been working as a secretary, but there were no vacancies at all. And she couldn't do anything else. She had to look at unskilled positions. That's how Emma became a kitchen assistant at a local restaurant. Emma's job duties included a variety of functions. She cleaned the kitchen floors, washed dishes, and carried pots from table to table. Whatever was asked of her, she did. Emma worked hard. She was always on the job. It was hard work. At the end of the day, her back ached, her legs ached. It didn't pay much, but it was enough to rent a small apartment. But this job had a nice bonus at the end of the day: she could take home leftovers. Not an unreasonable perk on a tight budget. Did Emma miss her old life? Did she long for a comfortable apartment, traveling, expensive boutiques? No, I don't think so. Emma was sad, of course, but not about the beautiful life that Aiden had once provided for her. She missed Aiden himself, despite what he'd done to her. Emma still loved him so much that she couldn't even look in the direction of other men, although familiar friends were constantly advising her to get on with her love life. Sometimes Emma imagined that something had happened after which Aiden had lost all his money, his company, his house, all his possessions. Naturally, his new young mistress would immediately turn her back on him. She's with him for the money. That much is clear. But Emma would forgive Aiden everything betrayal and dislike and would gladly accept him. But that's just fantasy. Emma was well aware that such a thing would never happen. As time passed, Emma's mental wounds slowly but surely healed. They were now healed scars. Emma lived alone. She was in her late 40s. No children, no husband, no profession, no proper job. Emma was often sad because of this unsettledness. She wanted so much to come home to someone, to take care of a dear, beloved person and accept their care. Loneliness is sad and even scary. Of course, the woman could have had an affair with someone, but in her surroundings there were no people suitable for the role of the other half. She didn't know what true love was, and she couldn't settle for anything less now. Emma couldn't get over herself. There were bookish joys in her life. She loved to read and became a regular visitor to the local library. Dostoevsky, Bulgakov, Tolstoy. Emma devoured the works, familiarized herself with the inner world of the classics, and rethought her own fate through the prism of the events in the novels and stories. At school, she was not particularly fond of literature. All these works seemed boring to her. Half of the words she did not understand at all. Now was probably the right time. Besides, Emma had a cat. Maggie turned out to be a very clever and affectionate animal. It was like she could sense her mood. If Emma was sad, the cat would rub against her legs, as if to calm her down. And when her mistress was tired, Maggie became quieter than water, lower than grass. On that cold autumn evening, Emma packed a delicious dinner for Maggie, leftover red fish and beef scraps. For herself, of course, she'd grabbed something for herself too. It was amazing how much food was left in the kitchen. By the end of the shift, she'd saved a lot of money on food. Emma buttoned her jacket up to her throat and pulled her hat over her ears. She didn't feel like going outside. The wind was howling so hard the windows shook. It seemed to be starting to rain. But I couldn't spend the night at work. Maggie was at home, her favorite book, a soft couch. It was cozy and warm, though very lonely. And it's a short walk, a couple blocks, and Emma's there. She had rented an apartment near the restaurant, so she was saving not only on food but also on transportation. Had to be practical. When Emma heard that voice, a weak, shaky voice that sounded desperate. "Help me, please. I'm hungry." She stopped. It was very unexpected to hear a voice in the street in this weather, clearly belonging to a small child. "Can you help me?" Came from the cabin of a wooden-colored ship, standing proudly in the playground. A girl came out of it, a very young girl. She looked no more than 5 years old, huge, frightened brown eyes, plump lips, black, beautifully arched eyebrows. Tangled auburn strands were poking out from under a stretched cap. The girl was wearing a gray boy's jacket, which was 2 sizes too big for her. On her feet, she wore sneakers that were worn almost to the ground. Everything indicated that she came from a dysfunctional family. The girl looked at Emma with a scrutinizing stare, like she was trying to figure out if she was friend or foe. What are you doing here?" Emma said at last. "I was walking down the street. It started to rain and the wind picked up, so I hid here." "Where are your parents?" "My mom died, and my dad disappeared somewhere," she said. "At first we traveled with him for a long, long time by train. It was great on the train. It was warm, the bed was clean, and there was plenty of food. We were going to Grandma." That's what Daddy said. "And then we got off the train. Daddy told us to wait for him and left. So I went to look for him, but he was nowhere to be found." "Why did you leave?" "Dad must have come back for you, but he didn't find you. Now he's worried, running around, looking for his daughter," Emma said. "I waited a long time," the little girl shook her head. "We came from the train station in the morning. I had already left at night when it got dark." It did seem strange. Emma couldn't understand why a man would leave his daughter alone all day to, I don't know, go to the bathroom or deposit her things in the luggage room. But according to the girl, she waited for her parent all day. "He probably abandoned me," sighed the little girl. "Daddy doesn't love me. Mom loved, but she died. And Daddy? I heard him tell his friend that I was a burden to him." Emma didn't know what to do. Leaving the girl out here in the cold wasn't an option, that's for sure. Dragging the child to the police wasn't an option either. The baby needed a good dinner and a warm bed. At the police station, she would have to sit on some chair all night, while they drew up a report, while they figured out where to put her, while they called the guardianship. "Let's go to my place now," Emma finally decided. "We'll eat, watch TV. I have a cat, you can play with it. And tomorrow we'll go to the police, and the uncles will decide what to do with you." The police? The girls tense right away. "Don't go to the police. I didn't do anything wrong." Emma realized that the little girl was afraid of the police for something. Most likely she had transferred such an attitude to law enforcement officials from her parents. Maybe they were doing something criminal? It's a possibility. Normal people don't put their kids in this situation. "The cops are good and kind," Emma reassured the little girl. "We'll ask them to find your daddy, okay?" Yes, she nodded and added, "I'm very hungry." "Auntie, do you have sausage at home?" Emma's heart squeezed with pity for this hungry, abandoned child. Somehow she reminded her of herself as a child, needed by no one, forgotten and abandoned by everyone. Emma held out her hand to the girl, who smiled and clung to it happily, on the way they met. The girl knew her name perfectly well, Emily, but she couldn't say her last name. It was strange for a rather small child of 5. Emily told a little about her life. At first, the little girl lived with her mom and dad somewhere either in a village or on the outskirts of a small town. The story of little Emily shook Emma to the core. The girl's parents apparently abused alcohol. Emily mentioned noisy companies, fights, falling asleep on the floor people, including complete strangers. And in all this ugliness, a small defenseless child was growing up. Listening to Emily, Emma thought that she was lucky to be in her aunt's family as a child. Yes, and she hadn't been loved much, much less spoiled. But she had never witnessed such horrifying scenes. Emily was driven to work almost every day by her parents. As Emma understood it, they would take her to the center of the small town and leave her at the crosswalk to beg for alms. Begging traveled a long way, according to the girl. Emily was given a lot of alms, of course. A doll like her brown eyes alone were worth it. She had oriental features, swarthy skin, coal black eyelashes and eyebrows. She looked like a beautiful, expensive doll. Even pity such a treasure. They don't cherish it, don't appreciate it, Emma thought. Emily should go to kindergarten, wear smart dresses, play with her friends. She is so energetic, bright, curious. But the girl had to spend her days in a dark underpass and beg for change from passers-by. "Did they hurt you there?" Emma asked, thinking about what could happen to a small child on the street. No, Emily shook her head. Everyone knew me in the passage, both Uncle Matvey and the guitarist, and Aunt Klava. She sold knitted socks. Daddy often came to check up on me. In the evening, Emily's family returned home, and everything went on as before. Sometimes Emily was alone for days in an empty house. Her parents were out at someone's house. Other times, company would gather at their place. Emily didn't know any other life, and therefore talked about everything that happened to her easily and casually. It was the norm for her. Emma, meanwhile, was almost moving the hairs on her head with horror. And then Mommy died. Emily sighed. Daddy said that Mommy had gotten some bad vodka. God saved him. He fell asleep before they opened the bottle, so he survived. But Mom didn't. Her friends were poisoned along with her. Emily missed her mother very much. According to the girl, her mother loved her, treated her with candy, called her beautiful princess, made her beautiful ponytails. But sometimes she beat her, of course. It usually happened on days when Emily didn't get much alms. But if they gave a lot, she kissed her daughter, hugged her, sang songs to her daughter, and looked at her with kind eyes. Daddy's not like that, Emily said. He never hugged me. He never sang me songs or told me stories. He doesn't love me, but he's still my daddy. And he takes care of me. Now he's lost or abandoned me because he doesn't need me. Finally, they got to Emma's apartment. "Come on in. Don't be shy," she said. "Maggie's here to see us and she missed us." Emily felt like she was in a normal apartment for the first time. Everything here seemed unusual, strange, amazing. It was the simple things that really excited the little girl. The bathroom, for example. Emma immediately filled it to the brim with warm water to wash the girl, or the lamp on the wall, or the toaster. Everything seemed like a post-war miracle. Emma wrapped Emily in her robe and carried her into the kitchen. Dinner from an expensive restaurant was waiting for her here, grilled vegetables, chicken kebab, and fruit. At the sight of such a variety of Emily even confused. Is this what to eat? Can I have it? You. Emma smiled. Taste it. It's delicious. Emily greedily devoured the food. It was obvious that the little girl had been starving. Then Emma put Emily to bed on a makeshift bed made of 2 upholstered armchairs. She didn't have a second bed in her apartment. I love it here, the sleepy little girl said. May my daddy never be found at all. I want to stay with you. These words echoed warmly in Emma's heart. Emma was pleased that Emily liked it at her place. On the other hand, she couldn't get too attached to the little girl. She'd have to go to the police with her tomorrow anyway. That's a shame. It's so nice to take care of a child, to see its happy eyes, to open the world to it. I can't tell you how it feels. Even if only for one evening, but Emma felt like a mother of a wonderful girl. In the morning, she had to dress the baby in her old dirty clothes. There were no other clothes. Emma asked for time off work and explained the situation. They were sympathetic and even gave advice on how to talk to the police, so that they would not think that a kind woman had taken someone else's child. Emma was surprised. She had never even thought of such a possibility. At the police station, she went to the duty officer and told him her story. He looked at the 2 visitors with surprised eyes and called somewhere. Then he called the number of the office and let the woman with the child through the turnstile. The young man in shoulder straps listened to her, then asked Emily a few questions, then wrote down Emma's data and suggested she go home. What about the girl? What about the girl? Emma asked. We'll deal with it now. You stay in touch. Most importantly, we'll be in touch. You're a witness in this case now. What's going to happen to her? Emma was no longer indifferent to Emily's fate, especially since the girl clung so trustingly to her hand. What would it be like to walk away and leave her here with strangers? The little girl had been through enough. Can I take her? I promise to be in touch with you 24 hours a day and to take the child wherever she needs to go. The policeman shook his head negatively. I could see in his eyes that he would love to help Emma and Emily, but he wasn't supposed to. I want to take her away. The words came out of Emma's mouth before she could think. If her parents can't be found, I'll take custody of the child, temporary or permanent. It doesn't matter, as long as she's with me. Are you sure? The policeman looked at Emma in surprise. More than sure, she replied. I don't want her in an orphanage or a hospital. Let her go through all the necessary procedures with me. I'll sign everything that needs to be signed, and I'll provide the certificates. We'll keep that in mind, the policeman nodded, making some notes in his report. But Emily still had to spend about a month with strangers. First, she was put in the hospital, in the so-called quarantine block. There, the girl was examined from head to toe. It turned out that the health of the little girl is excellent. Then Emily went to the orphanage. Emma visited the little girl almost every day. When Emily saw her, she would rush to her and hug her tightly. It was such a sweet moment. Every time Emma brought her a treat, some sweets or an interesting toy. It was a joy to see the child's eyes light up with joy. All this time, Emma was preparing the documents for the adoption of the girl, collecting the necessary certificates, attending the school of foster parents. She could not imagine that Emily would live with someone else. And the girl herself was drawn to Emma with all her soul. It's a pity that the opinion of a 5-year-old child is unlikely to be taken into account in court. The search for Emily's father hasn't progressed. Alerts, interviews with possible witnesses, advertisements, TV spots. Nothing worked. Emily's parents seemed to have fallen through the cracks. Emma was inclined to believe that the little girl was right. Her father had really abandoned his daughter, just left her at the train station in a strange city. Emma had problems with adoption. She was an unmarried woman. She had no place of her own. Her salary was small. Everything was going to send Emily to an orphanage. And their embittered children, angry educators. Emma could not imagine tender little Emily in such conditions. Although the girl had a lot of things to live through for her 5 years, but still she had parents who took care of her as much as they could. In the orphanage, everything will be different. The situation with Emily's adoption was indeed a difficult one for Emma, but she kept her hands up and was determined to solve the problem. Colleagues advised Emma to hire a lawyer specializing in such cases. The services of a professional cost a lot, and Emma had to sell the jewelry, which once gave her a former lover. These jewelry were for her a memory of happy times, but for the sake of Emily, she did not hesitate to part with them. The lawyer had to work hard. The case was not easy, but in the end, he prevailed. The day Emma received the adoption order from the court, she felt like a huge burden had been lifted from her shoulders. She and Emily would now be together. The baby was saved. She wouldn't have to live in the orphanage. And Emma now has her long-awaited native child, the most precious treasure. Emma immediately went to the orphanage to take Emily home. The girl even cried from the excess of emotion. "I will leave with you and never come back here again," rejoiced Emily, hugging Emma. At home, everything was ready for the arrival of the little girl: a new crib, a closet with dressy dresses, a desk for studying. Emma fulfilled all the requirements of the guardianship authorities, setting up a full-fledged children's corner for the girl. And she herself took great joy in choosing furniture, clothes, toys, and books for Emily. It is much more pleasant to take care of someone than to take care of yourself. So for almost 40-year-old Emma began a new, completely different life. But now the change was definitely for the better. Emily turned out to be just a gift child, lively, inquisitive, but at the same time obedient. This clever and kind little girl tried her best to take care of her new mother. And it was so touching that Emma had tears every time. Emma and Emily's life after the adoption was filled with joy and new experiences. Emily quickly adapted, finally finding a long-awaited home and a caring mother. Soon the girl went to kindergarten, where she immediately made a lot of friends. Energetic, intelligent Emily was always in the center of attention, inventing exciting games and activities that like a magnet attracted other children to her. Emma couldn't get enough of her daughter. Emily did not remember much about the past, as if she had decided to forget everything that had happened before she met Emma. Only occasionally at night she stirred restlessly and sobbed apparently, and her subconscious still remained unpleasant memories of life with her biological parents. But in the morning the girl could not say what she dreamed. When Emily went to school, it turned out that she has a great aptitude for math. While classmates solved simple examples, she, having coped with the compulsory part, took on the Olympiad tasks for high school students. Fortunately, the teacher immediately recognized the talent of the little student and developed it in every possible way. In middle school, Emily became interested in computer science and programming. Emma looked at her daughter and marveled at how all these complex formulas and algorithms fit into the head of a 13-year-old. The woman herself was stupefied by a single contemplation of the code, and Emily drummed her fingers on the keys with a keen look, solving one puzzle after another. Emily won local and regional Olympiads more than once. Teachers believed that the girl had a great future. Emma was proud of her daughter and loved her immensely. And at the same time, she was constantly worried about her. As any mother, it is an inevitable price for the happiness of motherhood. Emma was perplexed. How in a family of marginalized people who abused alcohol and neglected her daughter to such an extent that she begged for alms in the underground passages, could be born such a gifted girl? How could she suddenly have such brilliant abilities? It seemed strange to Emma. Emma didn't have time to ponder Emily's fate for a particularly long time. She had to work even harder now. She wanted to dress Emily in beautiful fancy clothes, feed her daughter delicious and healthy food. That it all required money. So Emma did her best. It was hard to be alone, but the woman did not regret anything. On the contrary, she considered herself happy. Fate had given her such a luxurious gift, Emily. It was an ordinary fall evening. Emily was already asleep with her hand under her cheek, just like when she was a child. Wow, how fast children grow up. 8 years had flown by. Emily had grown from a touching little girl into a beautiful young woman. Huge brown eyes, long shiny hair the color of melted chocolate. A slender, tall, swarthy girl. The admixture of Oriental blood gave the girl's appearance a special flavor. A beauty and a clever girl too. Nature was not stingy, generously endowing Emily with everything at once. Emma smiled and returned to the laptop screen. The woman was trying to find the TV series she had been told about at work. The search engine, as usual, came up with a bunch of unnecessary stuff. Emma was about to close the tab, but then her eyes caught on a picture. The woman looked at it and could not believe her eyes. A slender teenage girl with long brown hair and a dazzling smile. Behind her, the merry sea was rushing by. She posed in a bright pink swimsuit on the ocean. The wind fluttered the young beauty's hair. Behind her, the waves were splashing, and it was Emily. The same facial features, the same smile, even the proportions of her figure were the same. But how was that possible? Her girl had never been to the sea. The ocean, white sand, palm trees. The longer Emma gazed at this girl, the more she wondered. The teenager didn't just look like her daughter. It was Emily. Emma could even see the mole on her thigh. Emily had the exact same one. She pulled away from the screen and took a few deep breaths. This couldn't be a mere coincidence. Gathering her wits, the woman clicked on the photo. It turned out that the picture was on a social networking site on the page of one John Williams. Apparently, the girl was his daughter. In the profile of this stranger were more photos. On some of them was present an Emily. That was the name of the young beauty posing against the ocean. Emma wasn't good at English, but she could tell from the captions on the pictures. The family lived in a large and beautiful house. Often traveled mother, father, and daughter Emily, incredibly similar to Emily. The girl's mother was young, so Emily turned out to be such an exotic beauty the mixture of blood gave a spectacular result. It happens all the time. Emma couldn't take her eyes off this Emily. Mimicry, facial features of the figure the girl was an exact copy of Emily. The most interesting thing is that the head of the family, apparently, worked in the field of technology. This was evidenced by the photos on his page. And after all, Emily also has a talent for programming. Emma made up her mind. She sent a letter to John in Russian without even bothering to translate it into a translator he'd figure it out. She attached several photos of Emily to the message. In the letter she told the story of her girl. Maybe it was all just a coincidence, but something told Emma that such coincidences just didn't happen. John replied right away. He thanked Emma and asked her to stay in touch. He wrote that he couldn't tell her everything now, but he wanted to meet her and was even willing to fly to Russia for that. He was going to do it as soon as possible. John asked Emma when it would be convenient for her to meet, anytime. Emma texted him and turned off her computer. What had just happened now? Why did she immediately, without even thinking of the consequences, write John that letter? What would happen now? Emma's heart clenched with icy anxiety. She wished she could go back in time and not send that letter to the stranger from the internet. But Emma had always acted in her daughter's best interests. And she'd done the same this time. What's in store for Emily and Emma? Her foster mom has no money, no connections. The girl has already refused several times to participate in programming contests and tournaments just because Emma could not pay her way. Sponsors were not always found, unfortunately. Besides, Emily is already 13 years old. She hadn't seen the sea, hadn't gone on vacation to big cities, hadn't traveled at all. Emma simply could not pay for all this, although she tried very hard, worked hard. And here was a wealthy programmer from California. Maybe he could be a part of Emily's destiny. I mean, she looks just like his daughter. There's a reason for that. In the morning, Emma told her daughter. She was surprised. The girl looked at the photos on John's page for a long time, frowning her eyebrows, thinking about something. I think I remember these places. Or rather, not so much I don't remember, but I dream about something like this house sometimes. Unsure, of course. Maybe just something similar. Interiors like this are often glimpsed in Hollywood movies. It's amazing. But the weird thing is that we look like copies of each other. Her hair is only a little shorter, but everything else is the same. It's weird that Emily agreed. But I read once that every person on the planet has a doppelganger. Everyone, in fact. Maybe you found my doppelganger. Emma shook her head. She had some thoughts about the girl's similarities, but she didn't voice them to her daughter. John flew in 2 days after Emma had written him the first letter. All the time before his arrival, they continued to correspond. The man wanted to know the smallest details about how Emma had found Emily. She'd told him everything without a word. What now? They met at a local coffee shop. Emily was at school and Emma had the day off. John was a tall, trim man with blue eyes and blonde hair. He didn't seem to look anything like Emily. I am a professional editor with a degree in philology and 20 years of experience. Here is the edited text to meet your requirements." And yet the attentive Emma caught the resemblance, the dimples on John's cheeks when he smiled, and the eyes. The man nodded in the same way. Even his nose seemed to wrinkle. It turned out that John knew Russian. He'd worked with Russian developers for a long time, so he'd learned it. Of course, the man confused words and cases and spoke with a terrible accent, but Emma understood him perfectly. "It's an incredible story," John said as they sat down at the table. "I couldn't believe it when I saw your daughter's picture. I'm so glad you wrote to me." Emma nodded. She wasn't sure she had done the right thing. She felt like her life was taking another turn. Things were about to change again, and she didn't know if it would be for the better. John might take Mary away from her. Emma could sense that, and she could already guess that Mary was no stranger to the man. John made a pleasant impression, handsome, polite, energetic, very friendly. Emma could almost physically feel the warmth emanating from him. There was nothing repulsive or suspicious about him to fear or dislike. And then he told his story. Emma caught every word greedily. A lot of things fell into place now. The puzzle was coming together, but what to do next? John was a talented computer programmer. After high school, he moved to California, where he first attended university and then got a job. He bought a house, married the beautiful Leah. His career was going uphill. The young, talented programmer was entrusted with complex projects, and one day he got into a team that cooperated with developers from Russia. They all worked together on a grandiose international project. In John's personal life, too, everything went as well as possible. The young family was born 2 twin girls at once. John and his wife Leah were happy, healthy, beautiful daughters, financial prosperity, love, and mutual understanding between spouses. What more is needed? When Maggie and Lexi were 2 years old, John was sent on a business trip to Moscow. He had to solve several work issues. A matter of a few hours a day. The man still had a lot of time left to get acquainted with this beautiful city, and he made a huge mistake. He offered Leah and the girls to go with him. This trip was supposed to be an exciting journey, but it turned out to be a real nightmare for their family. At first, everything was going just fine. John would drive to the office for 2 or 3 hours in the morning, and then walk around Moscow with his family all day. They all visited the zoo together, went to the Tretiakov Gallery, walked around Red Square. It is true that 2 small children are not only mindfulness, joy, and happiness. Both young parents were tired. Probably this was the reason that one day John and Leah let their guard down. It happened in a park, a huge, beautiful park with fountains, wide, flat paths, and playgrounds. There were many people in the park on that sunny day. It was not surprising the weather was great. The weekend was ahead. It was as if parents decided to take their children for a walk. A colorful, dressy, and inviting crowd. John held Maggie's hand. He assumed his wife was holding Lexi's hand in the same way. For a while, Leah and her daughter disappeared from the man's view. Somehow the sea of people had swept them in different directions. Lexi had always been more curious, more energetic than Maggie. Always running, climbing, and scrambling. Everything was interesting to her. Leah was better at handling her. John thought Lexi was dragging his wife off to find adventure again. It happened so often. He wasn't worried at all. 5 or 6 minutes passed, no more. When John finally saw Leah, she was standing at the monument, looking around for her family. When she saw John, the woman smiled and rushed toward him. She was alone, without Lexi. John tensed up, of course, but didn't panic yet, because he didn't know if Lexi had stayed on the swings or was tailed behind her mother's back and was just out of sight. But then Leah asked a question. "Where is Lexi?" she asked, looking anxiously at her husband. That's when John realized everything and turned cold with horror. Leah thought Lexi was with him, but he thought the daughter had stayed with his wife. The little girl was lost, and it had been about 7 minutes, if not more. How to find her in this huge park with so many people? What to do? John immediately called the police. They responded to the call with lightning speed, because it was a missing small child. A squad arrived at the park. At first, everyone hoped that the girl would be found quickly. Just lost, just wandering somewhere on the paths, admiring the neighborhood, exploring the world. It was in Lexi's nature. but the little girl seemed to fall through the ground. It soon became clear that something had happened to her. We had to come home after a month, John continued. We left with nothing. We didn't know where our little girl was or what had happened to her. It was horrible. There aren't even words to describe how Leah and I felt. We couldn't sleep, we couldn't sleep, we couldn't sleep. And we blamed each other. We were on pins and needles. I was in constant contact with your law enforcement, even hired private investigators. They worked on the case too, but not a single lead. Lexi disappeared, like she vanished into thin air. Years went by. There was little hope of finding Lexi. Emily grew, matured, transformed from a little girl into a beautiful young woman. Looking at her, Leah and John could easily imagine what their Lexi looked like now. The search was still going on, but of course not as intensely anymore. It had been 11 years, after all. Leah always felt that Lexi was alive. John shook his head. She didn't doubt it, and she was right, Emma said. Kira was Lexi. There was no doubt about it. Then, years ago, the little girl had been taken from the park. The girl was probably too young to pronounce her name correctly, and the people who had taken her had decided her name was Kira, not Lexi. Of course, Kira didn't remember anything. She was just a little girl, after all. She was barely 2 years old. She gradually got used to her new mom and dad, learned the language. They made a professional dancer out of her. That's probably why they took her. And then something went wrong. Kira's so-called mother passed away, and the father? Maybe he found someone else. A way to make money, and he didn't need the girl, so he brought her to a train station far from the city, where he left her with a light heart. Then Emma found Kira. All that time in California, the girl's real parents were worried sick. No, they had to learn to live with the loss, but I can't even imagine what Leah and Jonathan had to endure, not knowing the fate of their own child. It would drive you crazy. I guess the only thing that saved their parents was that they had another daughter, Emily. She's the only thing that kept them going. And then you send me this letter and a picture of my daughter. I'm sure you're Kira's, Lexi, John continued. I haven't told my wife yet. I need to check everything first, do a DNA test to know for sure. Because if there's been a mistake, Leah won't be able to bear it. There was no mistake, of course. The test confirmed Kira and Jonathan's parentage. I told my daughter everything honestly, Emma said. The woman, of course, was worried. Now that Kira's family had been found, she would be alone again. How could she live without her daughter? How to tear her out of her heart? And she'd have to do it anyway. Kira's not her property. It's important for her to live with her blood relatives, and they can give her so much more than I can. She may not be rich, but she has a bright future with them. I marveled at the way Kira and Jonathan interacted. You could tell they were soulmates. Kira talked to her father as if they hadn't been apart for years. They laughed at the same jokes, discussed programming languages, argued over solving complex problems, understood each other with half a word, even half a look. Emma immediately realized that Kira was 100% her father's daughter. The woman wasn't jealous? No. She was happy for the girl. Now Kira would be truly happy. The paperwork took a while. Kira continued to live with Emma. John, on the other hand, preferred to stay in a hotel so as not to bother his landlady. They saw each other every day, walked, talked, discussed the future. Kira was leaving with her father. It was already a settled matter. The girl was looking forward to meeting her mother, and especially her sister Emily. She was a little worried, but lived the days before the flight in joyful anticipation. You bet, the girl would soon have a whole new life. But it was hard for Kira to part with Emma, the person who had raised her. How will I be without you? Sighed in the evenings the girl. I do not understand what is happening to me. I seem to want to leave as soon as possible, to see how things work there, to meet my mom and sister. But without you, I'll feel bad. We'll get used to it, Emma smiled. And then we'll see each other. I'll come to visit you, and you'll visit me here sometimes. And Skype too. It's not like that, you know. Of course, Emma understood. She tried her best not to show her sadness to Kira. Emma was used to having such a sweet little girl in her life. She'd raised her, considered her a daughter, but that didn't give her the right to make Kira her property. No, Emma had made the decision that was most helpful and beneficial to Kira, and now she had no doubt that she'd done the right thing. And then Kira and John flew away. A cold emptiness formed in Emma's soul at the same moment. Yes, once again the woman was starting a new life, and it would take some getting used to. Kira wrote and called often. She quickly settled into the new place, made friends. Emma had no doubt that she would. Kira talked excitedly about how much fun she was having, but she always ended the conversation with a phrase about how much she missed Emma. If only she knew how much Emma missed her. A few months passed. It was New Year's Eve. Emma decided not to decorate the tree this time. She had always done it for Kira. Now why would she do it? Emma was spending the holiday alone. She'd been invited to visit, but she declined. She wasn't in the mood. She wanted peace, quiet, comfort. She wanted to sit quietly, watch a New Year's Eve program on TV, and think about her own thoughts. Just at that moment, a beep sounded, announcing an incoming Skype video call. Emma smiled. Of course it was Kira. There was no one else. Indeed, a smiling Kira appeared on the screen. The girl's eyes were shining as always. Behind her shoulder loomed Emily. Emma still couldn't get used to the fact that the sisters were so much alike. Since the reunion, they had become inseparable. Kira wished Emma a happy new year, wished her happiness and good luck, told her again that she missed her, and then announced that John wanted to talk to her too. Emma wasn't surprised. She had talked to both him and Leah often. They told her how things were going with Kira and constantly thanked her for saving their baby girl. John probably wants to wish her a happy new year. There's nothing special about it, but from the look on John's face, Emma somehow immediately guessed that her life was kind of ready to take another steep turn. The man looked serious and determined. The woman's stomach even churned with an uneasy feeling of foreboding. John did indeed wish her a happy new year. And then he said, looking into Emma's eyes, "Kira misses you very much. Very much." Kira wrote and called often. She quickly settled into her new place and made friends. Emma had no doubt that she would. Kira talked excitedly about how much fun she was having, but she always ended the conversation with a phrase about how much she missed Emma. If only she knew how much Emma herself missed her. A few months passed. It was New Year's Eve. Emma decided not to decorate the tree this time. She had always done it for Kira. Now why would she do it? Emma was spending the holiday alone. She'd been invited to visit, but she declined. She wasn't in the mood. She wanted peace, quiet, comfort. She wanted to sit quietly, watch a New Year's Eve program on TV, and think about her own thoughts. Just at that moment, a beep sounded, announcing an incoming Skype video call. Emma smiled. Of course it was Kira. There was no one else. Indeed, a smiling Kira appeared on the screen. The girl's eyes were shining as always. Mary loomed over her shoulder. Emma still couldn't get used to the fact that the sisters were so much alike. Since the reunion, they had become inseparable. Kira wished Emma a happy new year, wished her happiness and good luck, told her again that she missed her, and then announced that John wanted to talk to her too. Emma wasn't surprised. She had talked to both him and Leah often. They told her how things were going with Kira and constantly thanked her for saving their baby girl. John probably wants to wish her a happy new year. There's nothing special about it, but from the look on John's face, Emma somehow immediately guessed that her life was kind of ready to take another steep turn. The man looked serious and determined. The woman's stomach even churned with an uneasy feeling of foreboding. John did indeed wish her a happy new year. And then he said, looking into Emma's eyes, "She has everything to be happy, but she's still not completely happy. Does she miss you? Mary and I thought it would pass. We could just call each other, visit each other. But you two seem to have formed a strong bond. Kira. It literally splits in two. One part is reaching across the ocean to you, and the other part wants to stay with us. The pediatrician said it was very dangerous to her health. So then I decided to make you an offer you just couldn't refuse." Emma was shocked by John's offer. It had never occurred to her that they might take such a step. Turns out there was a small house and lot for sale near them a few years ago, and John bought it for me after losing one of his daughters. The couple wanted the other one to stay with them, even as an adult. So they bought this house, where they planned for me to live with my husband and children. But Kira and Maggie are just kids. Besides, they both already said they don't want to live in your neighborhood. They both have grandiose plans to conquer the world, and your cozy neighborhood is too crowded for them, John smiled. Anyway, the house is empty. We're asking you to move in. Emma looked at John in silence. She didn't even know what to say. His words were too good to be true. Would she really be living next to Chris? Yes, she would have to get used to everything new, learn the language. But that doesn't matter. If you get a chance to talk to Chris every day, John continued. Will there be a job for you here? A lot of families need a nanny. Do you have any experience? Besides, there are a lot of restaurants here that are always in need of kitchen helpers. Chris said you might be the right person for the job. So you'll take it? There's nothing keeping you in your own town. This way. You'll be close to Chris. The girl's very attracted to you. She needs you and we need you. Mary and I want to do something nice for the man who saved our daughter. Emma suddenly realized that these people were like family to her. They cared for her happiness as if she were their own. We are one family, she said quietly, looking at the screen and smiling. Now the house still sits idle for nothing. I will also take care of it, so I will help you a lot. But what do I think of your offer? Emma looked at John, who was waiting for an answer. I suppose I should say that I need to think about it, weigh up the pros and cons. But why? Because the decision is already in my head. It's just great news. Of course I'm in. You see, Elizabeth is your daughter, all right, Sharon said in a confident tone as she examined little Holly. She had just turned 2 months old, but she seemed to have grown a couple of centimeters since her last visit. But thank goodness, the young mom exhaled with relief. Thank you, Sharon, for coming right away. As soon as I saw the rash, I started imagining all sorts of horrors. I thought of all kinds of things. And do not need unnecessary imagination, said the pediatrician after checking the arms and legs of the baby for the last time. It is better to call me right away, and then you yourself are nervous, and the child with his mood worry. She feels everything, even though she's just a baby. Right, Holly? Sharon smiled at the baby, and she bounced happily in response. Oh, what would we do here without you? Elizabeth said sincerely, putting her hand to her heart. How good it is that they send such wonderful and caring specialists to us in such a remote area. Sharon said nothing. She smiled politely and began to pack her medical case. The woman turned 35 this year, but she worked and lived in a small southern village lost in the depths of Siberia. For almost 2 years now, Sharon had been assigned a small, bright house and her own office in the local hospital, the only one for many dozens of kilometers around. Despite the fact that Sharon, being a native of Moscow, was accustomed in her work and daily life to completely different conditions, the modest and somewhere even harsh life of the Siberian wilderness did not frighten her at all. The woman found in such an existence a kind of special spirituality, like that felt by monks, praying in their ascetic cells in ancient monasteries. Sharon. Wait. The pediatrician heard a familiar voice behind her. Charlotte. A kind-hearted, blonde-haired woman who worked on a local farm was hurrying toward her, carrying a large, labeled can. Charlotte, don't shout like that. You mustn't shout. You might fall, she said, looking at the woman rushing toward her. The milkmaid only waved her hand. What can I do? We're all used to it here, Charlotte said, puffing out her breath after a brisk walk. Sometimes you rush in at dawn, don't you? You think she'll be all right, especially if she's expecting a calf. Sharon, I brought you some fresh milk, said the villager, holding out a can to the pediatrician. It was a particularly good milk yield. No, Charlotte, no need, tried to refuse the doctor. But the milkmaid was very persistent. Take it, she shook her head. Do you know how much of this stuff I have at home? But you still need it more. Your work is so important. You treat our children every day until night on rounds. It's not just milk, it's nothing. Charlotte just did not spit on the ground from irritation, remembering the previous pediatrician. For you, do you know what kind of doctor she was? She basically didn't care about the kids. Only did what came to the hospital to gossip, all the gossip we'll discuss. She'd put all kinds of makeup on her face and twirl her tail in front of our paramedic. Sharon hurried to take the can and thank the woman. She sensed Charlotte was about to get back on her favorite horse, and so she did. But whatever that St. Petersburg goat does, Charlotte continued to rage, no matter how much she tortured him. Vincent wouldn't even notice her, for crying out loud. "I hear you, Charlotte, but I really have to go. I've got a lot of paperwork to do at the hospital." But Charlotte was unstoppable. She couldn't rest until she'd spoken her thoughts and feelings to the end. That was her broad country nature. "Vincent's a different kind of bird. He's a what's-his-name, isn't he?" The woman thought of the right word and was silent for a moment. "Aesthete. That's not the kind of girl he wants." Charlotte looked at Sharon with a cheerful slyness and finished. "Like you would find my wife quiet, calm, so that in the children of her soul to put her soul." The young pediatrician was embarrassed, feeling herself blushing to the roots of her hair. "Sharon, please," Charlotte continued. "You should look at him, and Vincent, as soon as he lost his wife. So consider, 5 years as a widower. He doesn't fit in here. He came to us from the capital too." Sharon truly wanted to go to hell at that moment. She quickly mumbled something about not having time. She thanked him again for the milk and hurried away from the chatty Charlotte. Everyone, literally everyone in the village, was wooing her to Vincent, the local paramedic. Sharon didn't argue he was a good-looking man, tall, broad-shouldered, with a gait full of dignity, and only 5 years older than her. But despite the attention Vincent was showing her, Sharon didn't reciprocate it. To her, the handsome widower paramedic was just a pleasant colleague who had no feelings for her at all. And how could it be otherwise when the young pediatrician's heart was forever occupied by another man, her own husband? Sharon hurried to push the sad thoughts away. All the more so as the modest, beige and light gray building of their rural hospital loomed ahead. As she walked up the porch steps, she thought about how lucky she was that the people here had received her so warmly and friendly. Not every stranger from the capital city could win the trust of the villagers. Sharon, however, had managed to become practically one of their own. It was largely because she was literally obsessed with her work. And now, entering her cozy little office, the woman wanted to start filling out some paperwork right away, when her attention was attracted by a huge, lush bouquet on her desk. Someone had managed to put the flowers in a vase so that a wonderful fresh fragrance spilled over the room. That's not all that flashed through Sharon's pediatrician's mind. "I've asked you so many times," she sighed. "Sharon." Knock, knock. "Can I see you?" Vincent's perfect white smile brightened as he slowly pushed his way between the door and her office. "Good afternoon," Vincent Sharon said with a strained smile. "I assume these are flowers from you? Do you like them?" "I thought I'd cheer you up a little. You've been looking a little sad lately. Are you all right?" Sharon put the bouquet under the table and exhaled confidently. "The bouquet is beautiful. You didn't have to go to all that expense." She turned her gaze back to the flowers. "It was enough to wish me a good day. We've been over this, Vincent. I'm very much against any kind of attention in the workplace. Outside of work, too." Vincent's smile faded a little, but the man had no intention of giving up without a fight. "You know, Sharon, sometimes I think you're teasing me on purpose," the paramedic said without changing his face. "I just don't understand why you're doing this to me. To be honest, I'm starting to run out of ideas about what else I could do to please you." Sharon looked tiredly at the persistent suitor. "Vincent, how many times do you have to do this? How can I explain to you that there can be nothing personal between us? I know it's hard for you to accept the fact that I don't want to go out with you. But let's face it, we just want different things out of life. Our personalities don't match." Sharon looked at the paramedic pleadingly. She'd lost count of the number of times she'd tried to explain such seemingly elementary things to him. "It's because you still love your husband," the man asked her painfully. Vincent knew that Sharon didn't like to talk about her past life in the capital, and yet he never missed an opportunity to remind her of her reasons for moving to Yelchihu. Sharon's face instantly became impenetrable. "I'm sorry, Vincent, but I'm really busy right now. I'm afraid we have nothing more to talk about." "I understand your feelings as well as anyone. Sharon, Vincent said in a serious tone. Believe me, I've been where you are. But sooner or later, you're going to have to get back to real life. Sometimes we have to accept the fact that our nearest and dearest are gone. By letting go of the situation, you can finally look around you and see that there are people around who care about you. I'll be waiting for you. Sharon. I hope you soon realize that you and I have a good chance of making a wonderful family. Sharon looked at the paramedic. Her lips were trembling and her eyes were full of tears. Vincent, please. The woman cried out, pale, unable to contain her emotions, and then she burst into a womanly sob, dropping her head into her hands. Cry, Sharon, cry. Vincent said softly as he left her office. Maybe tears will sober you up. How many times do you have to act like a lady of steel? The woman didn't answer him. She just couldn't talk right now. So the paramedic had to leave her, leaving Sharon with the solitude she wanted. Sharon's mood was completely and utterly ruined. The pediatrician spent the rest of the day filling out the medical records of her young patients and their mothers, as well as seeing the babies in the hospital. The young woman tried to behave as usual, friendly and polite. However, there were cats on her soul. A familiar dull ache, coupled with intense anxiety, had begun to gradually fill her heart ever since Vincent had made her think of her husband again. Ryan, she said to him mentally every time she felt unbearably tormented. I believe we'll meet again. Let others say whatever they want. Remind me that you're probably not alive anymore. I don't believe it. I don't believe it, and I never will. You're so strong, so brave. You couldn't just die then, you couldn't. In the evening, getting ready for bed, Sharon sat for a long time in front of the mirror, looking at her face, which had stopped from heavy thoughts and worries. Who would have thought that in just 3 years the once young, energetic Sharon would suddenly turn into a grief-stricken woman whose gray hair, openly competing with the silver threads in her once perfect dark blonde hair, made her look much older and more serious than she really was. The young pediatrician used to love to read before bed, not professionally, but the most popular fiction she could get her hands on. Favor, in those days, living in the capital, the girl did not lack books. Here the maximum that she could afford was the magazine Bulletin of Medicine, and that by subscription, which she had so thoughtfully registered at the post office on the very day she moved to the village. No online store had ever delivered books to such a remote region. Yes, to be honest, Sharon was no longer drawn to the twisted detective stories or the magical adventures in a love story that she had once loved so much. The world had long ago lost all color for her, and only her work had kept the woman afloat. Immersing herself in the problems of newborns and their young, and sometimes not so young mothers, Sharon thus quenched her own pain, which every time stung her in the very center of her soul. It was worth it for the woman to remember that she herself was incapable of having children. Sharon stood up from the table where the small mirror stood, and out of the corner of her eye she noticed how thin and unattractive her figure had become. The expression that love dries a lonely woman dry described her at that difficult time in her life. She was lonely, and she loved with all her heart and soul, wholeheartedly and boundlessly one and only one person, who most likely was no longer alive. But pediatrician Sharon Kuznetsova couldn't even bear the thought of, as Vincent put it, resigning herself to letting go. Despite all the blackest moments of her reflection, there was still a faint hope in the same heart where the unrelenting pain now lingered. The hope that lifted Sharon in the morning every day and made her believe that one day she would hear the familiar warm voice of her adored husband. That night the woman could not sleep a wink. She kept returning her thoughts to her past, to those wonderful and easy years when she and her husband were truly happy, and nothing had marred their quiet family joy. They had made great plans for the future, and were completely unaware that all their hard-won happiness could collapse in an instant. Sharon felt tears running down her cheeks again. "Oh my God," the woman whispered to herself. "Ryan, honey, I'm sorry I'm such a sentimental fool." Before the inner gaze of poor Kuznetsova again involuntarily flashed colorful pictures of the years lived with her husband, gradually plunging the woman into a strong, but so simultaneously beautiful and sad dream, which the healer of children's diseases would prefer not to see at all, so as not to be even more emotional after her imminent awakening. Sharon had once had a very different life. Bright lights of the capital, work in one of the best clinics of the city, weekend meetings with her friends, and shopping trips to fashionable boutiques. All this was an integral part of the young pediatrician's daily routine. Sharon was born into a good and respected family of doctors. Her mother worked in gynecology all her life, while her father was one of the leading surgeons in Seattle itself. The girl always saw the example of her parents in front of her eyes. Strong, purposeful, they went straight to their goal and achieved everything themselves, thanks to their own diligence and natural talents, as well as the desire to constantly learn and develop in their chosen field. But besides all this, they also loved each other without memory, despite the fact that they lived together for almost 25 years. Their daughter dreamed of continuing the noble dynasty of doctors, choosing for herself the direction of pediatrics. Thus, Sharon was able to combine in one profession at once two of her passions, medicine and work with children. The girl studied easily and with pleasure, and easily graduated from medical school with honors, after which almost immediately got a job in one of the best consultations in the city. From there, she slowly moved to an excellent private clinic, where she worked for the next few years, gradually improving her professional qualifications. She met Ryan as a mature and self-sufficient young woman. She was 26 years old at the time. The young employee of the rescue service conquered Sharon by his strength, virility, but at the same time softness and kindness. Sharon had never met a man as understanding as Ryan. At that time, she had already had several unsuccessful romances, and she was disappointed in the opposite sex, intending to devote herself fully to work alone. That year, she and a couple of other specialists from the clinic were sent under a general quota for training in the so-called survival course. And that's where the girl first saw her future husband. The muscular blonde instructor immediately made her heart beat faster. His neat 3-day stubble looked so natural, but at the same time stylish, that Sharon involuntarily thought to herself, is he not watching her in some special way to keep her in such an attractive condition for all women? Being naturally shy and modest, Sharon didn't know for sure if this amazing young man would pay attention to her. So she simply continued her studies, trying to focus on the main thing she'd been sent here for. "Did you like our handsome instructor too?" Sharon Tora, her roommate in the student-employee dormitory and part-time young gynecologist, prodded her. "Now that's the kind of guy who's got some dignity. I've seen the way he carries himself. Like he knows he's got manners superior to any of us. We'll be on the hook in no time." "You got it, Tora." Sharon shrugged it off. She felt the color flood her normally so calm and clear face. "What are you talking nonsense again? He's handsome, of course, but nothing more than that," she said. "You were staring at him when he was giving CPR to that mannequin." She made a joke about her, that's all. "I imagined him doing the same to you." Tora rolled her eyes dreamily. Sharon just pressed her lips tighter together, looking down at her adorable nose. "Fuck, Tora. You look like a grown-up girl, but you're acting like a teenager, honestly. It's disgusting." "What's disgusting? You think if you act like a saint, he'll pay attention to you right away." Tora easily straightened her curly hair with her fingers. "You have to be brave, Sylvia. Now, men have long ago not modesty and women appreciate, and what is scientifically called initiative. Let others take the initiative." "I'm a fan of more classic courtship," Sharon said calmly. "If we're to meet, he'll be the first to announce his intention. And I, as a decent girl, will see if I should build a relationship with him, or if he's just a frivolous man, in a word." Tora shook her head reproachfully. "That's why Peter and Nick both ran away from you with their heels glistening. You're too picky. Do you think long and hard before you make the first move? Look, Sylvia, there's a lot of pretty girls here besides you and me. They might be ahead of you." "I don't want him." "Tora, calm down." Sharon had no stomach for it, but then she felt her heart racing, as if she were already jealous of Ryan's jealousy of some ephemeral other hottie her roommate had just told her about. All right, I'll shut up," Tora smiled, turning in her bed to her other side and adding, "Tomorrow we have our final class. There it is, your chance, take it. Or are you going to miss out on your happiness again?" Sharon didn't say anything. She just turned her back to the wall. Her face burned like she'd been rubbed with red pepper. Her heart was galloping in her chest, so that she thought Tora would hear that strange sound in the silence of the night room. It was the first time since their last breakup, or perhaps in her entire life, that Sharon had felt such strong emotions toward a complete stranger. What nonsense, the girl said to herself. Brian's? You haven't exchanged a word with him in 2 weeks, and already you're asking him to marry you? You fool, go to sleep. Tora's right. Tomorrow's the big day, the last class, which she needs to pass with flying colors. And she came here for a reason? With such exciting thoughts, the girl fell asleep that night. Strange as it may seem, the next day went quite smoothly. Sharon passed the exam with a solid A and was preparing to go with the other girls to the creative evening, organized for them by the base staff. At the moment when the girl was scrutinizing herself in the mirror, trying to make sure that the dress she had chosen was not too short for such an event, a quiet knock sounded at the door of her room. Come in, who's there? The girl shouted into the hallway, while adjusting the massive round earrings of silver and enamel in her ears. Someone silently came inside and stopped behind Sharon's back. The girl flinched when she saw a familiar, but unexpected reflection in the mirror. Is that you? God, you scared me, Sharon exclaimed, turning around. In front of her stood the same instructor, Ryan Smith, whom she had been thinking about so often the last few days. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that at all, the boy said, and lowered his stunning blue eyes in embarrassment. In his hand was clutched a small bouquet of wildflowers, which he, shyly, slowly extended to the girl. Here, this is for you. I'm sorry, I didn't know what kind of flowers you prefer, but we have amazing nature here. So I thought maybe the local flora would make you happy. Sharon looked up at him, her dark gray eyes wide with amazement. Ryan's face gradually flushed with a delicate blush, just as it must have done on her skin now. It's my pleasure, she said, taking the bouquet from him. They are really beautiful flowers, better than any roses. A shy hopefulness flashed in Ryan's eyes. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind going to the dance with me. We're having some sort of disco at the end of the night. It's funny, of course, grown men dancing to popular tunes. But still, I've been looking at you since last week. He was embarrassed. I apologize for being so frank, but Sharon, I like you very much, so I'd like you to do me the honor of spending this evening with me as my companion. Sharon's excitement made her speechless for the first minute. To think of it, the harsh-looking lifeguard turned out to be such a gentle and vulnerable person. One could never guess what was behind the facade of a male brutality and outward calmness. Ryan, it turned out, had been feeling the same way she had. Of course, I'll say the honor, she replied jokingly, and smiled sweetly at her chosen one. Just promise me that you won't smoke too much. You know, there is nothing worse than a partner who smokes before the dance. I just can't stand cigarette smoke very well. Ryan's face lit up with a bright and pleasant smile. That's a wish I can easily fulfill by pretending to be a fairy genie, the young man said. He folded his hands in the typical genie gesture and bowed slightly to Sharon. Sharon didn't know where to put her embarrassment. God, forgive me for this indiscretion, she exclaimed. I should have known that many of your employees are in favor of a healthy lifestyle. It's just that both of my previous admirers were not averse to the occasional cigarette. And it was a pain in the ass for me. Sharon looked into Ryan's blue eyes and bit her tongue. Who was she to bring up past men? But today the lifeguard took her words to heart. He didn't seem at all embarrassed by the mention of the girl's past romances. Ryan, giving her his elbow like a real gentleman, took her straight to the local house of culture, where the lifeguards had already prepared a wonderful concert for all the students with jokes, poems, and even songs of their own composition. Sharon liked the latter very much and made a great impression on her. That evening, the girl listened to a real bard's song for the first time. Thank you for this wonderful evening, she thanked her companion when the dance was over and they slowly walked under the blossoming apple trees to the girls' dormitory. It's been a long time since I've felt so, I don't know, so free. I guess it was so easy to get away from the daily routine and the ubiquitous hustle and bustle. Yeah, Ryan said, agreeing with her. I've always felt that this place has a special energy. It's like nothing special, just an ordinary base in the suburbs. But once you get a few kilometers away from the city, it's like a whole different world. No high rises, no shopping centers. At every step there is only a quiet, measured life, where everyone can find his real place. Sharon looked at Ryan and couldn't believe her happiness. Here he was, the man who understood her inner state more than anyone, No matter how much she loved the city with its frenzied pace of life, bright, sometimes shouting windows, ubiquitous cafes and stores, but only here, many kilometers away from the metropolis, she truly felt what life was. It was as if all her senses were heightened in an instant, giving her some secret, but at the same time so simple knowledge. Every person has a true purpose. It is only necessary to follow it at the call of your heart, and then harmony and grace will come into your life. Sharon suddenly looked at him seriously. "Ryan," she said, "can I see you again? I don't mean to be impertinent, but I just think that something good could happen between us." "Sure," Ryan assured her calmly. "Let's exchange phone numbers. I'll text you as soon as I get into town." Ryan smiled so joyfully and childishly that Sharon's heart was immediately warmed by the warmth of the light feeling that was budding in her soul. Back in the metropolis, Sharon thought a lot about what this amazing trip had given her. Should she write to Ryan herself? Or was it better to wait until he was free to make the first move? The girl's doubts were dispelled when a few days later she received the following message on her phone: "I'll be in town the other day. Do you want to meet in the park?" Without thinking for a second and trembling with joy, Sharon immediately replied, "Yes, I'll be looking forward to seeing you." The girl received a playful smiley face in response, and then exhaled with relief. It seems that a new stage in her life was beginning. The first date was followed by several more, and soon the relationship between the young people became really serious. Ryan and Sharon couldn't seem to spend a day apart. They were constantly on the phone, calling each other and sending each other cute postcards. Just like young college students just getting their first taste of true love. Less than 6 months later, Ryan proposed to Sharon. The girl naturally agreed, promising the young lifeguard that she would make him the happiest man in the world. "I'm the one who should promise you such things." Baby Ryan kissed his bride and said, pleasantly surprised, "Remember, a man's duty is to take care of his woman and give her only love and joy, but also to protect her." "You'll never regret being my wife," Ryan said to Sharon. Sharon's parents approved of their daughter's choice. Ryan instilled confidence in them and said the normal, right things. And after talking to Dustin, the girl's father, he became like family to them. "I grew up in an orphanage," Ryan told them honestly, "but I know what a real family should be like. Sharon had told me a lot about your relationship with Brenda. If I can come even an inch closer to something like that in my marriage to your daughter, I'd be happy." "It's good that you intend to make my daughter happy," Dustin told him. "But what about the fact that your job is dangerous? You might leave me alone. What then?" That question didn't bother Ryan at all. "We have all the security measures in place at the base. Yeah, there's a monthly diagnostic on vehicles and equipment. And in case of any damage, parts or technically important parts of the equipment are replaced immediately." Ryan spoke to the bride's father as if he were reporting on the condition of the facility to his superiors clearly and precisely, so that the man had no doubts. His job, though it entailed a risk to life, they had everything they needed to avoid that risk. As for Brenda, she accepted her future son-in-law as if he were her own son. The woman was worried that Ryan, being from an orphanage, had not received enough maternal warmth in his childhood, and therefore at every opportunity she tried to feed the young man with homemade pastries or hot soup. "Try this bread," Sharon's mother said, setting a plate of her specialty soup in front of Ryan. "I made it especially for you. I had a feeling you and my daughter would drop by today." Ryan was embarrassed to refuse, even though Sharon's mom's soup seemed a little heavy for him. As he thanked Brenda for the treat, he chuckled at Sharon, who also understood, but couldn't stop her mother's kindness. "I don't suppose you've ever had soup like this before." Brenda continued to fuss over Ryan. "Sharon can make it too. Don't forget to remind me more often. She's been doing nothing but eating on the run lately with her job." "She can't do that now. She's getting married, after all. And now it is already normal for him to feed and eat well, so that the baby you have soon." Sharon blushed like a boiled lobster. Come on. What baby? What baby? We're not married yet. We're not even getting married for another month. Ryan and I wanted to live a little for ourselves before we thought about kids." There was an awkward silence. Ryan looked expressively at his fiancée and then at his parents' disappointed faces. "A little bit. How long is this going to take? Brenda asked with sadness in her voice. I hope you won't be one of those modern couples who think it's better to have 3 cats, a dog, and a parrot than to have a couple of big kids. You're not one of those, are you? What? No, of course not, Sharon exclaimed immediately. I can't believe you would think such a thing. Ryan and I are perfectly normal people, and we're going to have kids. Just not so soon. I want to work a little longer, to finally realize I'm a professional first. Honey, there's nothing stopping you from pursuing your interests in pediatrics and being a mom at the same time, Dustin said reasonably. We're not old anymore, and we'd like to nurse our grandchildren while we still have the energy. All Sharon wants to say is Ryan suddenly joined the conversation, that she and I have decided to wait a year or 2 until we decide we're ready for a baby. No one's talking about taking away the joy of having grandchildren, Dustin, his future son-in-law, reassured him. Well, if that's the time frame we're talking about, that's fine, Dustin chewed his lip. All right. You can live for yourself for now. Just don't take too long. Sharon's at the right age. There's no telling what kind of pregnancy complications might arise if she wanted to have a baby after 30. Sharon clutched the spoon as hard as she could. As much as she loved her parents, such concern about her condition and the possibility of giving birth made her slightly panicky. The girl had always known she wanted to be a mother, but she wanted to decide for herself at what age and exactly how that would happen. Her father and mother kept pushing her, scaring her that her childbearing age had already crossed, in their opinion, all reasonable boundaries. Sharon still had fresh memories of how upset Brenda had been when she had broken up with her last boyfriend. Or rather, the real reason for her upset had not been her daughter's personal tragedy, but the fact that she hadn't thought to get pregnant by her boyfriend so that she could, as her mother had put it at the time, have a baby for herself and thereby bring closure to their family. Sharon felt Ryan squeeze her other hand under the table. His gaze seemed to say to her, "Calm down, this doesn't change anything. We're still going to do things the way we want to do them." Sharon smiled at her fiancé and thought again about how lucky she was to have met a man who truly understood her. Sharon's wedding was modest. On the groom's side were only a few of his best friends from the squad. On the bride's side were friends, relatives, and a couple of her father's good friends, who had been specially invited from the Department of Health. Sharon and Ryan had decided on purpose not to have a lavish celebration. They were going to use some of the money they had saved for the down payment on the mortgage. Young people dreamed of their own apartment, as Sharon all this time lived with her parents, and Ryan and et al. On a rented apartment. However, Brenda and Dustin gave the couple a royal gift for the wedding. Here, Dustin said to Ryan, handing him the keys to their new apartment. It's a 2-bedroom in the center of town, close to the subway. 10 minutes and Sharon can easily get to the clinic without traffic, and you'll be able to take a shortcut to your job too. Ryan didn't know how to thank his father-in-law, so he just hugged him tightly. Thank you, Dustin, the groom said sincerely. If you only knew how grateful we are. Don't mention it, said the bride's father. I do it first of all for my daughter, to make her life more comfortable. You take care of her and do not forget about the grandchildren. My mother and I will be waiting for them very much. The elderly surgeon reminded his son-in-law, and then jokingly wagged his finger at Ryan. When she learned that she and her husband would now have their own apartment, Sharon squealed with delight and threw herself on her father's neck. Daddy, my love, she said, kissing her father on the cheeks. You are the best, my darling. How did you and Mom manage it? Dustin said, infected with joy for his daughter. I knew you'd be getting married soon. So my mom and I decided to prepare a family nest for you in advance. We're not animals. We know how hard it is for young people to get their own place these days. Sharon and Ryan felt the happiest they'd ever felt. They bravely looked forward to the future and believed that a long and wonderful family life was ahead of them. The first 2 years flew by like a blink of an eye for the young family. Sharon worked at the clinic all the time, and in the evening she turned into a desperate housewife, always cooking something delicious and unusual to please her husband, returning late at night from his dangerous service. Ryan, on the other hand, was constantly on the road. He had been in all kinds of extreme situations. Sharon, of course, worried about her husband with all her heart. And every time she waited with bated breath for a call from him. But God willing, everything was fine. Despite the fact that Ryan had to pull people out from under the rubble, and for zealous fishermen chase away from the pond that was half standing, and much more. And then a joyous event happened in their family. One evening, when Ryan returned from work, Sharon met him with eyes burning with happiness and slyly glittering. "What is it, honey? What's wrong?" asked his beloved wife. "I have a surprise for you," Sharon told him confidentially and pulled him into the living room. There on the exquisitely set table, Ryan was waiting for a festive dinner, which he had not received from his wife for a long time. In the center, a large French baked chicken and wine awaited him on a huge porcelain platter. Nearby in pots lay boiled sweet potatoes and corn and fresh seafood, which Sharon had thoughtfully laid out on a separate platter. On the other side of the table, appetizing fruit was in a tall vase, and a bottle of excellent wine stood next to it. And for some reason, a carton of orange juice. "Wow," Ryan marveled sincerely. "We're having such a party for some reason." The man kissed his wife and looked at her questioningly. "Did you get a promotion?" "Well," Sharon said evasively, "you could say that. Just not as much of a promotion as you'd think." "Yes," said the husband, intrigued. Then his wife sent him off to wash his hands while she laid out clean napkins. She really wanted to make this evening memorable for them for a long time, and for that everything had to look just perfect. "But what's the surprise?" Ryan asked a little later, when she sat him down at the table and put the steaming chicken on his plate. "I'm all excited to find out." Ryan jokingly jingled his fork and knife, showing that he was both very hungry and waiting for his wife's response. "I'll tell you everything now, just for starters." "Open the juice and wine, please. I can have juice." Ryan didn't understand his wife's hint at first and started calmly unscrewing the cork from the bottle of wine. "Wait, why do you want juice?" When it suddenly dawned on him. Sharon tried unsuccessfully to suppress a smile, but she could feel herself starting to blush again. She covered her lips with her hand and looked at her husband eloquently. "You mean you're pregnant?" Ryan asked quietly. Sharon lowered her eyes, then nodded affirmatively. "God, baby, we're having a little one." "Oh, honey, sweetheart, I'm so happy," he exclaimed. "And I'm going to be a father, a father." Ryan almost dropped the bottle, trying to jump up from the table and hug his wife. When he succeeded, he twirled Sharon in a joyful waltz. The young woman laughed and never took her eyes off her beloved husband for a moment. "How many things do we have to do with you now?" hastily said, excited by the happiness of parenthood man. "We need to decide where the nursery will be, the crib to choose. Have you told your parents yet?" "Not yet," with a laugh, shaking her lush hair, his wife answered him. "We'll tell them together when we go to Mom and Dad's next weekend." Ryan nodded understandingly. "God, Sharon," I thought, "this is happiness. A loving wife and a hot dinner every day, a loyal support system. But this is something else entirely. I love you so much, my darling. I love you so much." Or Ryan and Sharon. An exciting but beautiful day began. Everything seemed to be the same as before, but now every evening they were together doing things inherent in all future parents. Together they chose a stroller for the baby. They dreamed how they would paint the wall to which they would put the baby's cradle. They argued about whether it would be a boy or a girl, and what name they would give their future baby. One day, when Sharon was already 3 months pregnant, she and Ryan decided to spend a cultural weekend, and therefore went to the theater. There was a new production of the opera The Flying Dutchman, and Sharon really wanted to see it. The play struck a young woman with its scenery and the powerful play of actors. The evening promised to be unforgettable, because after the theater Ryan offered to go to a restaurant. "But after such a 3-hour spectacle, you and I should definitely have something special to eat," Ryan said cheerfully to his wife as they left the theater. "You must be awfully tired. I'd be a terrible husband if I made you cook something at home after all this." "No, let's go eat somewhere nice." "If you do that, you'll be the perfect husband," Sharon agreed. "Honestly, I'm ready to eat an elephant right now, or at least a hippopotamus. Those tiny sandwiches in the theater cafeteria didn't impress me at all." Dinner went great. Sharon was getting ready to remember it as one of the most beautiful nights of their lives when the unthinkable happened. The couple was on their way out to the parking lot. Ryan had hailed a cab, and it should have been here any minute. when three strange men blocked their way. Judging by the dilated pupils and peculiar odor, these types were clearly under the influence of alcohol or some kind of substance. All three had tattooed arms. "Guys, look at the lovebirds," one of them shouted to the others, and the group instantly began to study Ryan and Sharon. Ryan realized at once what was going on. He threw up his hands in a peaceful manner. "Hey guys, don't worry. Let's break this up amicably. We don't need any trouble." He pulled his wallet out of his jacket pocket and took out all the cash he had. Everything he had. "Guys, really take it, go with God. My wife and I just want to go home." That's all Ryan said, as calmly as possible. But Sharon, frozen in terror, could feel how tense her husband was. The tallest of the three, obviously the leader of the gang, glanced at the small sum Ryan was offering him. Then he took a couple of steps toward Ryan and snatched the money from his hands in one swift movement. Like a monkey finding a new toy at the bottom of its cage, the bandit jumped up and down in front of his henchmen. "Look," he waved the bills in front of their faces. "The people are understanding nowadays. I'm glad I like it." "It's boring," one of them said in a nasty voice, and then he stared at Sharon. "No fights, no chicks for once." The bald, stout man took a slow step toward Ryan's wife. "I think this one's pretty good," the bastard said. "Juicy sweet. Don't you want to have some fun with some normal guys?" Ryan was instantly eager to fight. Sharon felt her mouth go dry. A second later, a nasty, sour lump rose from somewhere in her throat, making the woman instinctively clutch at her stomach, where the life of her small child lay. Fear. A nasty animal fear for the life of her husband and their unborn son or daughter was what Sharon felt at that moment. She pressed herself against her spouse's back, closing her eyes for a second. "Don't go near her," asshole Ryan threw in his face, and immediately assumed a fighting stance. "One move and you could kiss your worthless life goodbye." "Wow, this praised piece of shit can also talk," the third bandit, who was very muscular, answered instead of his comrade. "Science. Try saying that again." With these words, the bastard pulled out a shining folding blade, suspiciously resembling a razor. "Not so brave, eh?" said the fat man enigmatically, pointing to his friend's arm. "Now, my friends and I will quickly clean up your face, so that you know how to talk to respectable people. Will your new clothes come with us?" "Don't worry, it's not far to the nearest bushes." All three of them laughed like old hyenas. Ryan was like a rock, ready to make a death-defying leap. "When I say run, just run. Don't look back," Ryan whispered over his shoulder to his wife. No, I'm staying here with you," Sharon slipped into his jacket pitifully. "Come on, honey, come on out to the big guys." "Come on, honey. Come out to the big uncles," the fat thug said. "They want to play with you so badly that your husband can hardly get away with it," he laughed. All three of them lunged at her husband. "Ryan," Tora shouted, and Ryan was immediately engaged in a pitched battle with the three ghouls. He began to strike them with his legs and arms, trying to drive the bandits away from him. The man couldn't make a single grab because he risked slowing down too much, which would be a fatal loss for him. Sharon darted to the right, hoping to outrun the razor-wielding thug, but he was nimble and immediately delivered a powerful blow to the woman's stomach. "Where are you going, Otter?" The thug whispered and grabbed Sharon by the hair, pulling her against him. The woman felt first the stench of his breath, then the cold blade against her tender neck. "Ryan," she screamed, and Ryan immediately lost his guard, taking a crushing blow to the jaw and falling to his knees. "No," Sharon shouted in desperation and kicked him in the groin with all her might. Despite the pain in her stomach, she couldn't let the criminals kill her husband. "She's going to fucking kill him in front of her," the lanky guy shouted, and he and the fat guy started kicking Ryan in the stomach and head area. Sharon managed to escape from the fat man's death throes for a second, but he managed to slash her across the chest with a razor. Lowering her head, the girl saw a scarlet rivulet pouring down her light-colored dress. "Come here, you bitch," the villain growled, and with a short thrust, he jammed the weapon right into Sharon's stomach. In an instant, the world around her became one big blurry blur. The pain was so unbearable that Sharon forgot how to breathe as she whispered her husband's name one last time. she collapsed and fell into darkness. Sharon was consciously aware of the squealing of police sirens. Apparently, the restaurant staff had heard the noise in the backyard and called the police. An ambulance came with them, but Sharon didn't see that. She was surrounded on all sides by a clammy, cold darkness. Sharon. Sharon, can you hear me, sweetheart? Is it me, your husband, Ryan? It was with great difficulty that Sharon opened her eyes. Above her was a perfectly white ceiling that at first even blinded the woman with its light. Next to her, she heard a nasty beeping sound. It was her condition being recorded by special medical devices. Sharon felt a long plastic tube inserted into her nose and cool air flowing through it. Then the woman felt someone gently and tenderly squeezing her hand. Ryan, she said very weakly. Is it really you? Are you alive? Leaning over her, her husband's face confirmed it. I'm a tough nut to crack, thank God. You scared me a lot, sweetheart. I thought I'd lost you. It took Sharon exactly half a second to recall the events leading up to her hospital stay. Baby, the young woman exclaimed in a pale voice and immediately pressed her hand to her belly. It was completely flat and tightly bandaged. Our baby. Ryan. What's wrong with him? I asked my wife, anticipating the worst. Instead of answering, the man lowered his eyes and then ruffled his hair in a nervous motion. The doctors fought for your life for so long. They had no choice. There was no saving our baby anyway. I'm so sorry, honey, I'm so sorry. No way. It can't be. Sharon was hysterical. The attending physician came running into the room. What have you done? The elderly surgeon glared angrily at Ryan while trying to hold the convulsing woman. Who gave you permission to tell your patient such news when she was on the verge of death? Leave this room immediately. Nurse, hurry up and get me a sedative. The doctor turned to the nurse, who ran to the nurse at the same moment. It would have been better to say it right away, Ryan said grimly, struggling to rise from his chair. It would have hurt more later. The surgeon looked at him for a moment, then shook his head sternly. I understand you're both in shock. But that didn't give you the right to risk your wife's health like that. Ryan seemed to ignore what the surgeon had said. He looked at the unfolding picture with a sense of utter hopelessness. His beloved had almost died and lost a child. And he, an emergency worker, couldn't prevent it. Sharon, I'll come back tomorrow, his husband said with tears in his eyes and left the room. The hardest part for Sharon was just ahead. After a long and painful recovery, the doctor announced a disappointing verdict. Because of her injuries, she would never be able to have children again. The young woman was absolutely devastated. After arriving home, Sharon could not remember what had happened in those moments around her. All the days merged into one hopelessly gray streak. Ryan tried to somehow reach out to his wife, to bring her out of this comatose state. But it was no use. The parents, as depressed by their daughter's condition as her husband, also tried to talk to Sharon, but she was completely unresponsive. No one but Ryan and her family knew how hard it was for Sharon to get up in the morning every day to get back to at least a semblance of her old self. It wasn't until almost a year later that she was able to consciously perceive her surroundings again. The pain of losing the baby was still too fresh to completely forget the experience. The woman's stomach was now forever imprinted with the marks of that horrific evening. Sharon hid the scars under dark, tight clothing. She could no longer wear a swimsuit or a light summer dress. She kept feeling like strangers would stare at her gruesome cuts. Even with Ryan, she now acted cold and reserved. And by no means did that mean she blamed him for what had happened. But she knew the anguish he must have felt, and she no longer thought their love was appropriate. At least not until the whole story had finally dissolved into the daily routine of life as it went on. To recover and distract herself from the inevitable longing, Sharon went back to work, even though it was unbearably painful to look at other people's children every day. More and more often she found herself thinking that little by little, a little at a time, she was getting better. The pain was slowly receding to the very bottom of her soul, leaving only a calmness bordering on indifference. That had been Sharon's salvation to begin with. And then when she found herself in a state where she had just found stable ground beneath her feet, Her whole world fell apart again into tiny pieces from which she could no longer reassemble anything. It had been exactly 3 years ago, the year before Sharon had finally moved to Yale Chio. Ryan had gone on a business trip somewhere up north, to Siberia. There were terrible fires there that year, and Sharon's husband was called together with other emergency workers to extinguish the fire on helicopters by dropping a special extinguishing compound. The worst thing, in what all the time after that Sharon blamed herself, is that she felt exactly nothing. Calmly let her beloved husband, the only person she had ever known, go on that damned business trip. 2 days after Ryan left, she got a call from an unknown number. "Hello," Sharon Clark said, an unfamiliar male voice. "Yes, it's me. Who am I speaking to?" "This is Captain Leo Stone of the emergency response team. Your husband, Ryan Clark." Sharon's heart immediately dropped into her stomach. It made it hard to think, not just to speak. "Yes," the woman said softly. "Sharon, be strong. Your husband died heroically while fighting a fire in the woods." Sharon felt the floor beneath her begin to move slowly away from her. Grasping the edge of the table to keep from falling, The pediatrician interjected. "So how is it dead?" "No, there must be some mistake. He's only been gone 2 days." "I'm sorry," the captain said a little more gently. "Your husband's helicopter got into a difficult situation. One of its blades failed, and then the whole apparatus fell into the river. We found the body of one of the pilots at once, but your husband must have been carried down the river by the current. Our divers are already checking the area." Something inside Sharon twitched weakly. Maybe it was the last strings of her nerves. "Wait, are you saying that Ryan's body hasn't been found yet? Wait, but that could mean he had a chance. Maybe he's still alive. Maybe he's washed ashore somewhere and needs help." There was a sad sigh from the phone. "If only it were that easy," Sharon Leo answered her. "There was a lot of height from which they fell. Plus the damage to the helicopter is such that, in general, if I were you, I would not have any illusions. But our team is doing everything necessary to comb the area as efficiently as possible." Sharon answered the captain coldly and firmly. "Luckily, Captain, you're not in my shoes and you're not likely to ever be. I'll be on the first flight as soon as possible. I want to be personally involved in the search for my husband." "I suppose so, Sharon, but you don't need all this. I promise you," Leo warned her paternally. But the lifeguard's wife was a stubborn person when it came to keeping her family together. "Let me decide for myself what I do and what I don't want to do. Captain, give me the address. I'll be there." Having warned her parents and superiors, the woman went into the heart of the taiga with members of the search and rescue team. Sharon searched the forests, but there was no sign of Ryan. "I told you you'd only be wasting your breath with this," Captain Stone lamented Sharon's arrival. "We haven't accomplished anything anyway," Sharon told the captain. "No," Sharon told him firmly. "My husband will be considered missing until you find his body. Only then will I accept that he's dead. Until then, you must keep searching as long as you can." An exhausted Sharon returned to New York. The search for her husband continued for several more months, but all was in vain. Finally, the woman came to a difficult decision to abandon everything in the capital and move permanently to a remote taiga village. That's exactly what Jilburi turned out to be. "Daughter, think about it," Brenda begged her, depressed by the situation. "I understand your grief over losing Ryan. He'll always be in your heart. But you don't just want to leave your job and your home. You want to leave us?" Sharon's elderly mother was struggling to hold back tears. "Mom, I'm sorry, but this is the only thing I really need right now," the pediatrician explained to her. "I can't stay here anymore. It reminds me of how much he and I had, how much we had in common and how much we lost." Brenda looked at her daughter with an attentive, understanding gaze. "Promise to write to me," at least her mother asked with a pleading tone in her voice. "Of course I will, Mommy," she said, hugging the older woman and assuring her daughter. "I'll write as soon as I get settled in. I'll write right away. I have already agreed with the local hospital. They take me immediately on specialty. Can you imagine? The staff there is very small. Only 10 people. so you don't have to worry about rumors about me. Oh, honey. Rumors are so infectious, Brenda said, wiping her eyes with her handkerchief. If you don't want to, they'll come out of thin air. You're new to them, so they won't trust you at first. They'll look at you. You just have to be patient, see if you can fit into their way of life. Just write to me, sweetheart, and don't forget your mother and father. Sharon hugged her mother fondly and promised her that she would be all right. The next morning she was already sitting in the airplane carrying her to the distant, uncharted Siberian lands. Sharon had made 3 transfers to Joelbury, 2 of which were by small private helicopter and 1 by an old, half-decayed bus. One thing Sharon kept carefully hidden, even from herself. She hoped to move to the remote taiga and become at least a small microscopic part closer to her missing husband. When Sharon woke up the next morning, after a heavy night of dreams mixed with memories, her head ached so badly that she didn't know where to put herself. After taking 2 painkillers, Sharon made her way to her medical station, hoping that the fresh air and the sense of forest herbs would cheer her up a bit. As soon as she was deep into her paperwork, however, Charlotte Karen, the milkmaid, burst into her office. "Sharon, you've got all the hope in the world," Charlotte said, out of breath. "Charlotte, what's wrong? Calm down, take a breath. Would you like some water?" "I don't have time for this," the blonde waved her hand at her, panting. "Are we going?" Sharon didn't understand. "Kyla, our witch doctor Michelle's granddaughter, is not doing well. I was at their house in the woods the other day." Charlotte circled the space around her uncertainly. "So Kayla was already withering away before my eyes. And this morning her grandmother Michelle told her to call her doctor. Well, my potions aren't working." Sharon had heard something about Michelle, the village witch doctor, an old woman who was rumored to be over 100 years old. She rarely showed up in the village, preferring to buy food and things through the locals. Sharon didn't approve of the women going to the witch doctor, but there was nothing she could do about it. They had been accustomed to consulting the witch since they were little girls. The only thing Sharon hoped was that they would be smart enough not to entrust their lives and the lives of their young children to the witch doctor's potions. Not too long ago, though, there was a rumor in the village that Michelle had a granddaughter. However, no matter how many times Sharon herself tried to get to her to check on the baby, she could not find the old witch's hut in the woods. And Michelle's daughter Pamela flatly refused to see a doctor. She and her grandmother, in principle, as Sharon realized, were against modern technology and medicine. But they brought the child down with their herbs. Sharon exclaimed excitedly and immediately got ready to leave. "Kayla, how old is she?" "She looks like she's just a baby." "About a year old, maybe 2, Charlotte said after a moment's thought. "She's a baby," Sharon said, shaking her head. "Charlotte, can you take me that way or to their house? I keep getting lost whenever I go there." Charlotte looked at the pediatrician strangely, then muttered quietly, "It's strange, children shouldn't go there." She added louder, "Unless Michelle herself didn't give you a pass." "Okay, but follow me. Follow the trail. The terrain there is swampy. It's easy to stumble," the milkmaid replied. In half an hour, the 2 women were already walking in the impenetrable forest. Charlotte walked lightly and briskly, almost flying over the roots and sharp branches that seemed to avoid the villager. For Sharon, however, the journey had become a living hell. By the time they reached the edge of the forest, where the witch's neat hut stood, Sharon felt like a squeezed lemon and scratched from the trees and shrubs. "Here we are," Charlotte said, pointing to the witch doctor's house. "If you will excuse me, I will go home. I have 1,000 chores to do." "Of course you do," Sharon nodded. "Thank you for your help. It's amazing how I couldn't find their house all this time. It didn't seem that far away, but every time I did, it was like I'd lost my way." Charlotte eyed Sharon a little suspiciously. "Why didn't the old witch let her go to her house?" "Maybe she thought it was the right thing to do," she said on the way back. "Maybe she sensed some kind of competition from her." Sharon was a doctor, after all. A real one. Michelle and Pamela never liked doctors. Sharon, left alone, hurried up to the porch of the hut and knocked quietly on the open door. There was no answer. Then she decided to go inside herself without invitation. The atmosphere inside was mystical. It was as if Sharon was visiting Baba Yaga herself, Everywhere hung bundles of various herbs, jars with incomprehensible potions, and a pungent aroma of juniper and spruce needles. The young woman went into the living room, hoping that the sick child was lying here somewhere. The room was rather ascetic: an old oak table, a couple of chairs, kerosene lamps, a chest of drawers, and a couple of framed photographs. One of them showed a certain girl in a dress similar to the ones used for burning the pancake effigy in spring. She stood in an embrace with a very old, wrinkled, like dried olives, woman. Apparently that was who Michelle and her daughter Pamela were. My God, how old is Pamela then, thought to herself an amazed Sharon. If it's true that her mother is 100 years old, then this woman is definitely a witch. She managed to have a baby too. Sharon put the picture back and looked at the second picture. And that's when her inside snapped. "What are you doing here?" came from behind her in a chastening old man's voice. "If it were up to me, you'd be wandering in the swamps like this. Yes, it seems that now the situation is desperate. The taiga itself let you come to me." Sharon slowly turned to the witch doctor, meeting the gaze of her unkind black eyes like the eyes of a raven. Michelle was very petite, less than half Sharon's height, but she looked very determined and a little hostile. "Where did you get that?" Sharon asked, pointing to the second picture, where her Ryan stood with a bushy beard and long hair down. Sure, he'd changed a lot in appearance, more rugged, and his eyes were unkind. But it was definitely him. "You put that back," the old woman said. "It's not yours. It's not worth looking at." Sharon's lips quivered and her knees went weak, as wobbly as when she had tried to escape from the bandit. "I'm not doing anything until you tell me where you got that picture," Sharon almost shouted in the witch doctor's face. The woman tightened her immortal, dry lips a little. Then she answered, "You'd better ask him. Will you see him soon? Did he follow you into town too? We just missed each other. You know, that's your fate." Michelle sighed heavily and then asked with pressure, "So you're going to treat my child or not? What did I call you here for?" Sharon woke up as if from a long sleep. She was trembling inside. "Show me your granddaughter," the doctor nodded and followed her into a small room, the vault of which was even lower than the living room. Here in a tiny crib lay a pale little girl. Only her cheeks burned with an unusually bright blush. "Is that Kayla?" Sharon asked. "Take care of her right away," Michelle replied. "She's been getting worse since the third day. I don't know why my potions aren't working." "Yes, do you realize that your granddaughter has pneumonia?" Sharon asked her loudly, her eyes glittering. "The girl needs to be hospitalized immediately. Thank God Charlotte brought me to you. If you had, you would have lost the baby. Do you realize that?" The witch doctor's face crinkled like she'd taken a bite out of a sour apple. "Don't burn like that, do you understand?" The old woman replied obediently. "No, I'm just wondering where her mother is," Sharon asked, looking angrily at the old woman. "No, you should have let it go like that. All we have to do now is put her on a drip and pray for Kayla to come to her senses," Michelle said. The baby made a faint sound under the pediatrician's hands. "My God, she's burning up," the woman said, and pulled a syringe and a vial of medicine out of her case. "What are you going to inject her with?" Michelle asked, looking at the ampoule incredulously. "I won't let you operate on my granddaughter." And the herbalist blocked Sharon's access to the crib. "Calm down. This is the standard antipyretic used in such cases," Sharon replied, looking confidently into Michelle's eyes. The old woman hesitated, but still stepped back, allowing her granddaughter to be injected. "She should feel better now," Sharon said and looked at the witch doctor. "What are the normal words?" "You know, emergency? I need my granddaughter." "And how do I know what's in your heads, the newcomers?" asked her indignant tone witch doctor. "My adopted daughter went into the woods on the third day and never came back. Maybe it was your co-workers who took her for experiments. My girl, where are you now?" In the next moment, large tears rolled from Michelle's eyes. Sharon realized that the woman was no longer quite sane, and it would be better if she took the girl with her to the hospital. Behind all these thoughts, the pediatrician almost forgot the mysterious photo she saw at the old lady in the living room. However, in the next minute, the solution to this mystery appeared to her in person. "Doctor, is she all right?" Ryan asked with undisguised concern in his voice. "I called the elevator, but I almost fainted. I begged her to let me get a real doctor down here." Sharon turned cautiously toward the man, trying not to faint herself. Her lost spouse was standing right in front of her, looking exactly as he had in that photograph. "Ryan," she said, pale as a sheet. "Sharon, tell me it's true. Are you imagining things?" The man stared at her for a moment, uncomprehending. Then a spark of recognition flashed in his eyes, and then he grabbed the door to keep from collapsing to the floor. Memories rained down on his brain like a snowstorm. "Bill, what are you doing?" Old Michelle looked from Sharon to Ryan and back again. "Haven't you ever seen our village doctor?" "Why not? Is she the one who calls you Ryan? So that was your name in your previous life?" Then Michelle scrutinized Sharon, and only after that she said with dislike, "So it was you he called then in a fever. And I wondered why I didn't like you so much at once. How did I feel that you were connected? I just didn't realize it was so close that it stretched across the country." "Sharon, honey, it's me, Ryan. You're seeing things right, honey. How could I have forgotten?" In spite of the distance between them, Ryan took 2 wide strides to his weeping wife and squeezed her in a tight embrace. I knew you were alive, Ryan. I talked to you every night, prayed for you, felt that you hadn't crashed in the helicopter. But who did? What do you care about Michelle and Pamela? And how did you end up here?" Her husband looked at her with anxiety, but with boundless love, then said, "I will tell you everything for sure. Only please, let's first take my daughter to the hospital. I'm very worried about her condition." "Daughter?" Sharon said in amazement and pulled away from Ryan. "Pamela had a baby with you?" There was a moment of tense silence between the couple, but then Sharon managed to pull herself together and said, somewhat dryly, "Yes, you're right, the child's life comes first." Taking the girl in his arms, the man hurried out of the hut. He easily led Sharon out of the woods and back to the village and carried his daughter directly to the hospital. When Kayla had been given all the help she needed and Sharon was sure that the little girl's life was no longer in danger, she sank tiredly onto the small couch in her office. "We can talk," Ryan said softly as he walked in. Sharon looked up at him, her eyes red with worry and tears. "Do we have anything else to talk about?" she asked in a colorless voice. The man walked carefully into the office and locked the door behind him. "Sharon, I have so much to tell you," he began. "But before I do, I want to assure you that if I could remember a single day of our life together, I would have come straight back to New York. I promise you." The woman smiled sadly in return. "I guess you had such a good time here that you didn't even have to remember anything. Nothing stirred in your soul while you were hiding with those forest witches." Her husband grabbed her hands and forced her to face him. "No, Sharon, you've got it all wrong. I just couldn't remember anything. You know I couldn't." And Ryan began his sad story. "I was blown into the river by a shockwave. I don't really remember how it happened. I just felt a strong jolt and a few seconds of free fall, and then cold and pain, when Michelle found me on the shore. I was badly mangled and unconscious. She and her daughter Pamela managed to drag me to her hut. And there," the man sighed nervously, "there I spent the next 6 months, barely regaining consciousness. Those women cured me, no matter what anyone says. Some of their potions have incredible healing powers. I don't know, maybe it was something like a coma, except when I finally woke up, I was a blank slate, you know? I didn't even remember my name, didn't know who I was." Ryan rubbed the bridge of his nose, as if he wanted to erase from his memory all the terrible things that had happened to him. Sharon listened without interrupting. She wanted to know the whole truth from him, all the way to the end. "I've been relearning how to walk. There's something wrong with my back, because I can't always keep my balance. But that's okay as long as you don't try to run too fast or carry too heavy a load. Pamela has been with me from the beginning. She nursed me, spoon-fed me. She brought me back to life. I'm sorry, but it's true." A bitter grin appeared on Sharon's face. How touching. The woman silently admitted to herself that she was overcome with jealousy. And then I started walking again solely because I had completely lost my memory. I decided to stay here for a while until I remembered who I was, and if I had a family. Naturally, I helped the women with their chores and hunted. But I did all that without leaving the woods, you know. Michelle led me to believe that I might be a fugitive. And then the police station would probably have an APB out on me. Ryan tried to explain to his wife. There was Sharon responded resignedly. Only the APB had you listed as a missing person. Sharon covered her face with her hands, unable to take in all this information. God, I've been looking for you for so long. I'm alive, Ryan replied firmly. I'm alive and I'm sitting here trying to explain everything to you. How do you explain your daughter? His wife brought him to the point. Ryan looked off into the distance, and for a moment he was transported into his own thoughts. I love Kyla very much, and I want to take her with me when this is over and she's fully recovered. It was a moment of weakness. Sharon, you have to understand, I didn't remember anything at all, and Michelle was so good to me. When she told me she was pregnant, I knew that whatever happened, I would take care of my daughter. His spouse turned away. She didn't want Ryan to see her face right now. Except Pamela was gone. Karen? The woman didn't understand. Pamela's gone. Remember when Michelle said she'd gone into the woods and hadn't been home in 3 days? Well, I found her today. What's wrong with her? Sharon whispered with a bad feeling. She's dead, Ryan replied shortly. Oh my God, Sharon exclaimed, clamping her hands over her mouth to keep from screaming. How did this happen? Her husband rubbed his palms, sweating with fear. Sharon had never seen him so frightened. I guess she went to pick herbs and berries. Anyway, it was a bear. I only recognized her by her dress, her basket. Sharon felt her feet go cold. Michelle, are you going? Ryan only shook his head. I suspected she'd already figured it out. She'd rather think her daughter drowned in the swamp than have me tell her such a terrible truth. They have a slightly different concept of death here. I buried Sabrina there, in the forest, so Michelle, God willing, will not stumble upon her. The taiga gives and takes back. Michelle said she found Sabrina as a lonely teenager. She was supposedly hiding in the woods from her stepfather. So she took her in. You don't regret her? She was a really nice person, Ryan said quietly. What can I do now that I found out about her like that? Sharon felt shame burning inside her. Alas, it was only after the news of Pamela's death that she had been able to see her as the person who had saved her husband's life, not as an insidious rival. Sharon? Ryan asked her quietly. Can we get out of here as soon as Kayla's better? We will. You can forgive me, right? Sharon looked into her husband's blue eyes and made the only decision she could make. Of course, Ryan. I'm still your wife, and I'll always be your wife. And so it was. As soon as little Kayla recovered, Ryan and Sharon quickly packed for the road and were ready to take a bus that evening to the nearest airport, where they could be flown to the mainland by helicopter. And then they could take a regular airplane to New York City. Ryan wanted to go to say goodbye to Susan as he was stunned by Charlotte's tragic news. It turns out that the old healer was gone the night before. Apparently could not survive the disappearance of her daughter, suggested the milkmaid then, and no one knew exactly how old Michelle was. Sharon even wept when she learned of the old woman's death. No matter how she felt about her and her unconventional methods of treatment, she never wished her a similar fate. Don't worry, Charlotte assured her. We'll give her a proper Christian burial. The pediatrician thanked the kind countrywoman, and after saying goodbye to everyone except Vincent's annoying paramedic, left with her husband and Kayla back to the capital. When they returned home, the first thing they did was to officially adopt little Kayla and restore all of Ryan's papers. Sharon's parents were happy to learn that their son-in-law was alive after all. They threw a big party for the occasion. and Kayla became the long-awaited granddaughter who came to them almost 10 years after their daughter's wedding. Ryan went back to work and rescue, but due to an injury he could no longer work in the field, so he went back to where he once started. He now counsels and trains young lifeguards. Now he is full of strength and energy, and wants to make his life more calm and measured, directing most of his time to raising his daughter and his beloved wife. Sharon, on the other hand, continued her work at the clinic. Returning to her former duties, she, as before, treats children. Only now she has her own little daughter waiting for her at home, whom she loves more than life, and for whom she thanks God every day. So, having gone through a series of difficult trials, the Clark family finally found a second chance for happiness. And this time they are not going to miss it.